evening. Today is December 18th, 2019. It is 4:34. As a quorum of the board is in attendance, I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Central Health Board of Managers. I'd like to begin the meeting by announcing that this public hearing regarding the Local Provider Participation Fund, the LPPF, and the corresponding item number 4 will not be discussed this evening. These items will be back before the Board of Managers in January for the record. Those items are, number 1, receive a public comment on the proposed mandatory payment rate to be assessed on the institutional healthcare providers during fiscal year 2020 under the Local Healthcare Provider Participation Program, LPPF, in Travis County, and how the revenue derived from these payments is to be spent, as required by Texas Health and Safety Code, subchapter 298E.101, and regular agenda item 4, discuss and take appropriate action on the proposed mandatory payment rate to be assessed on institutional healthcare providers during fiscal year 2020 under the Local Healthcare Provider Participation Program, LPPF, in Travis County, and how the revenue derived from these payments is to be spent as required by Healthcare Safety Code 298E.101. We will be taking our regular agenda items out of order this evening. First, the board will receive our required annual trainings on open government and the conflict of interest reporting, which are items 1 and 2. And then we'll move into the remainder of the regular agenda, starting with citizens communications, which we'll anticipate beginning at 5:30 p.m. After citizens communication, we will take up the remaining agenda items in the following order: items 5 through 9, item 15, item 3, item 11, item 10, and finally items 12 through 14. Regular board meeting. Number 1, receive training on the Open Government Statutes. Hasib and David will be presenting. Thank you for coming, guys.
Board members, my name is Hasib Abdullah. I am a Travis County County Attorney working with David Duncan and Holly Gummert. We will start with the Public Information Act. Okay, got it. Thank you. There we go. Thank you. And specifically, the background definitions, the request and the process and penalties. Specifically, the Public Information Act was adopted in 1973 by the 63rd Legislature. The legislature believed that every person is entitled to complete information about the affairs of government and the official acts of public officials and employees. The act enables the public to request copies of public information and to inspect public information on site. Texas is really foremost in public information compared to other states and the federal government in terms of the Freedom of Information Act. So what is considered public information? According to Texas Government Code 552, public information is information that is written, produced, collected, assembled, or maintained under a law or ordinance or in connection with a transaction or official business by a government body. Essentially, all information that Central Health owns or has a right to access to. Now, forms of public information, I know most of you already know about this, but the definition of public information applies to and includes any electronic communication created, transmitted, received, or maintained on any device if the communication is in connection with the transaction of the official business. So audio and video recordings are included, emails, internet postings, texts, or instant messages, and that potentially could be text on your personal phone too, depending upon what the topic is. It does not matter what the information is located, so at home or on a personal device or account. So, official business means any matter over which the government body has any authority, administrative duties, or advisory duties. So it's very, very broad. And how is a public information request made? So the request must be in writing to trigger the PIA, the Public Information Act. It could also be handwritten or typed. Requests must ask for information in existence as the date of the request was received. So no requirement to create new documents, no requirement to answer questions, or no requirement to perform legal research for the requester. No magic words either, so no requirement to label it as an open records request or public information request. So you have to be very careful about what was requested, because the laws and the case law and the AG opinions are pretty broad in terms of what is a Public Information Act request. And requests may be delivered by mail or in person, or delivery by email and fax. A government body may designate a person who is authorized to receive requests by email or fax. If the government body makes such a designation, the PIA is triggered only if the request is directed to the designated person. Note, written requests that are not sent by email or fax do not have to be directed to any specific employee or officer. So email and fax are a little bit more stricter in who it goes to. What should you do when you receive a request? Do not ask the requester why he or she is making the request. If the request was sent via email, forward the email to publicinforequest@centralhealth.net, the Public Information Act designated email address. Or if the request was delivered by mail or in person, either scan and email the request to the email address set out above, or contact Brianna Yanis for further instructions. And promptly produce the information you believe to be responsive to the request. Promptly is really important because it means, definitionally, it means as soon as possible under the circumstances, that is, within a reasonable time without delay. But if you cannot produce the information within 10 business days after the date the information was requested, you must certify that fact in writing and let Monica Crowley know a reasonable date and hour when the information will be available. So timing is paramount. It's extremely important. The next chart is a kind of a chart through. I'm not going to go through all that, but it's when you guys have time, you can maybe take a look at what the timeline, the processes are. At some point, the AG is involved in terms of what is allowed and what isn't. So that's something you can look at on your own. I will end with the penalties. There are some potential criminal penalties and other penalties, civil penalties, that might happen if you refuse to provide public information. There's that. It's on there: providing, distributing, or misusing confidential information, destroying, or removing, or altering government information. So the PIA in Texas is very robust and very serious. And if you have any questions, let me know. If not, I'll pass it over to David, who will do the next presentation. Yes.
I just heard yesterday, and this relates to us, but I was just wondering, the Attorney General's office has been sued by the City of Hutto several times, 17 times I think is what reported.
Okay.
Have we had any situations in which we've had to address within the attorneys here?
There was one occasion in the time that Central Health has been in existence in which we entered into a settlement agreement with the AG's office and the requester for information.
So
one time.
An agreement, but not a lawsuit. Okay, thank you.
Oh yeah.
Would you prefer to finish up and then we ask questions or not? Because if no, I was going to ask a follow-up just to that.
Oh, let's finish discussion.
Okay.
Let's finish.
Then I'll ask later. Thank you.
I will move us to the Texas Open Meetings Act. Very similar. It was adopted around the same time, actually, in response to the Sharpstown scandal, for those of you who remember Sharpstown.
Mm-hmm.
The Open Meetings Act is also about government transparency, transparency from the perspective of making sure that government does its business in the open. With very limited exceptions, the Act requires all state and local government entities to conduct their meetings in an open fashion, give notice. The Board of Managers is a governmental entity for purposes of the Act. The statute sets forth, and the board is allowed to go into closed session with in response to certain very narrow specific exceptions in the Act. Before we have a closed session, as y'all have seen many times, you have to convene an open session. Chair has to announce that the closed session is going to be held and identify the authority for that, the specific sections, and these are the ones that we most commonly use. In fact, I think these are all of the ones that we use. Consultation with attorney is the most common. It has to be where you're seeking counsel from your attorney, pending and contemplated litigation, settlement offer, And the last part confuses a lot of people, a matter on which the duty of the attorney to the government body might conflict with their disciplinary rules, obligations. And what that really means is, I can't say that out here because if I do, I'm putting you in a worse position. That's what that means. One of the obligations of an attorney is not to disclose facts or opinions that might put the client in a worse position. The next exception is deliberations about real property. We've seen that a number of times. This one is actually a little bit broader in terms of the scope of when you're allowed to go in. The attorney one is very specific. Exchange, the value of the real property, basically anything that might affect your ability to negotiate the value of that property with a third party. And that can be a public or a private entity. If you're negotiating with the city or some other entity, if it might affect your negotiations with them, you can go into closed session. Personnel matters, also a very common one. What's in the middle of that, public officer or employee, that can be extended to someone who's an appointee but is not an employee. So if you appointed the appointments that you made to other bodies, those people are a public officer, so you can actually go into closed session to discuss appointments to other bodies. Certain providers of healthcare services, this one is certainly wordy. We have obviously, if Dr. Bell was here, I'm sure he'd be smiling at me. This is the one we've struggled with a bit with Sendero and what Sendero information we can hear and call a competitive advantage issue between us and Sendero. Pricing or financial planning information relating to bigger negotiation for the arrangement. Basically, if we're going to provide services to the public, healthcare services, and we haven't announced publicly. So this could be something like a clinic or something else that we're thinking about opening, and we haven't talked about that yet publicly. If you're talking about the service that it could possibly fit under that. A proposed new service or product line that the hospital district before publicly announcing. That's in that second bullet. Notice requirements. We're required to give 72 hours notice before the meeting. What we have traditionally done, because the meetings are on Wednesday, we always try to post our meetings by Friday. That enables us to get the backup to you early. It's actually more than 72 hours. 72 hours would actually be Sunday evening. But we're not there on the weekends. And so we do try to post, and we're getting 3 full business days of notice, and plus that weekend. The notice, the purpose of the notice and the way we write the items for your agendas, it's designed to let the public know what you're going to do. It's not really to constrain you in what you can do, although it does kind of do that. It's really, the objective is to notify the public of the items and the issues that you will be discussing. We post the notices outside in the bulletin board with the Travis County Clerk's Office, and online on the website. Back to the scope of the posting, you have to discuss items within the ambit of and the wording of the posting. If someone comes up in public comment and raises something beyond the scope, or if there's a related item, if something comes up as part of an item and you say, oh, I'd like to talk about this, Holly will generally remind you of the scope and say, there's language in the act that allows you to do 3 things in response to something that's not officially on the posting. You can talk about facts, you can talk about existing policies, or you can schedule it for a future board meeting. Those are the 3 things you're allowed to do. You can always ask questions. If a member of the public is up here commenting and you want to ask them clarifying questions about what they're talking about, that's actually fine. That's actually eliciting facts. Public participation. We are one of the main reasons for having board meetings posted and having them be public is so that the citizens can show up and observe what you do and comment on what you do. Back to the public commentary, you're not really supposed to deliberate it if it's not posted. We can follow up, or the board can follow up and direct the staff when they'd like to post a non-posted subject for a future meeting. You all have an online message board, which is also specifically allowed for in the Act. You can post written communication or exchanges. If that form is accessible to the public, they have to be available for a minimum of 30 days, and they're limited to a universe of people that are authorized to post on that. It's not like Twitter where everybody can just post their thoughts. Recording, you have to make a record of every meeting. We make audio recordings of all of our meetings in closed session. We're not required to do them for attorney, but we do make some record of our attorney deliberations as well, or our attorney closed sessions. All of the full Board of Manager meetings and the budget and finance are recorded in this room and kept on the Central Health website. And we do keep minutes. Obviously, you guys approve the minutes each time, so we have minutes recorded for each meeting as well. Participation by video. This is relatively new. It's been within about the last 10 years that this has been allowed. The board is allowed to do this, and you can have a meeting if the quorum of the board is physically present at one of the locations that's on the video. We really need to know pretty far in advance if we're going to need to do this, because it does have some technical requirements that you have to meet, and it takes a little bit to verify the connections and that sort of thing. There are some. It's a fairly lengthy section of the act. If someone falls off, they're considered absent or not present for that portion of the meeting. You can vote, but you can't participate by telephone. The only time you can do a telephonic meeting, they're very specific. There are a few very specific sections of the act that apply to certain universities and water river authorities. But in order to have a meeting by telephone, basically it has to be an emergency. There has to be a hurricane or a fire or a true emergency, a real disaster, a natural disaster of some kind. Discussions outside of a meeting. This has been a very hot topic for the last few years. A walking quorum is essentially trying to get around the meeting by meeting in groups smaller than a quorum with the objective of evading the act. The act makes it a crime to knowingly engage in one communication of a series of communications outside of a meeting. This is actually brand new language, just passed in the most recent legislative session by Senator Watson to fix a case that was overturned the old language in the act. It was a county commissioner in a small county sued and said, you can't prosecute me for that. And it was overturned by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, but then right in the very next session, the legislature fixed that. Two other bills that passed this most recent session, House Bill 2840 requires actually a board to allow any member of the public to address the body on any posted item before or during the body's consideration of the item. So they can comment at citizens' communication, or when you bring the item up, somebody can say, I'd like to say a few words about this. Either one of those meets the requirements of the act. Lastly, this one is not that likely to apply to us, but the Senate Bill 494 modified the definition of emergency to basically narrow it, change the types of situations that would apply. And emergency meetings, if you call an emergency meeting under the act, you can only actually vote on things that have to do with responding to the emergency. And that is all I have, and I'm certainly available for any questions.
Questions?
Cynthia.
Yes, mine was a follow-up to Manager Jones's question with respect to, I guess, the Hutto situation. But what I really would like to know, is there ever a designated level of importance on the issue that the Attorney General's, that's before the Attorney General, the question on the Attorney General for them to make a decision as to whether or not something can be shared or not shared? And if so, if it's like here with Central Health, Holly, you said that we have had one instance here. Can you tell us what year that was?
I think, but I may be off a few years, that it began in 2014.
Okay.
Because it was settled in 2017.
Oh, wow.
But you may be asking, I think what you may be asking is, when the AG gets a request for an opinion on whether information may be accepted, do they designate it by priority? So is this request more important than someone else's request? Is that what you're asking?
No, what I'm actually asking is, I'm assuming that this is designated an internal issue to be addressed administratively, not brought to the board level. And I'm wondering if there's ever an issue that would be brought to the board level. That's what I'm referring to. So is there on a scale of importance, you know, and who makes that decision, and if it is or is not brought to our attention as a board?
That's a great question. To my knowledge, the current procedure does not involve bringing requests to the board for consideration of whether to make an argument or not. I do think that there is, certainly if we're going to dispute the Attorney General's ruling on whether we have to release something, that, in my opinion, is something the board would possibly want to know about.
That's exactly what, now that's what I'm getting to. That we've never had that situation, correct?
Just once, yeah.
Okay.
And it was before any of our time and before Mike's time.
Well, if it was 2014 to 2017, we were on the board. So I was just, okay, I was just.
Vice Chair?
Yes, I have a question regarding quorum and walking quorum. I know if we are all invited to, let's suppose that there's an event and the entire board is invited to the event. What happens in that case?
There is it's called a social meeting exception in the Act. And
Right.
the social meeting exception is if you all get invited to ribbon cutting at Dell.
Right.
If we didn't sponsor it, and we've actually, Holly and I have actually talked about writing you guys some simple guidance on this.
This would be helpful.
And it essentially comes down to, if we didn't sponsor it, and it's not about our business. So if it's not about, if we're doing a ribbon cutting for a new clinic that we paid for, yeah, okay, we probably better post that.
Right.
If it's Dell and they're opening up a new wing at Dell Children's,
And
and
we're
you
all
all get
invited.
invited and 5 of you show up, it's a social event. It's not about you. It's not about your business. I mean, it's health, but it's not about public health of, as sponsored by Central Health or its affiliates. So
Otherwise, you'd have to post every time.
You'd
you
have
do
to
it.
correct. Every time
Right.
5 of you might show up at something.
So I think it would be good for us to have guidelines on that, just so everyone's clear. Second question, what if we wanted to meet socially, just as human beings?
That fits the social exception. As long as you, I will tell you, having been general counsel for a board, I urge them to invite either me or the executive staff of the agency to make sure they behave.
Got it.
Sorry.
Yes, no.
That's, don't talk shop is,
Right, but
is
that
my
would
only,
be
if you want to talk
socially
about
as
your
just
your
human
kids
beings.
and your grandkids, and yeah, that's great.
Yes, we can do
but-
that, but invite one of you.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It is possible to do that. Yes.
Okay, I think it would be good to have this in guidelines, just so we have it in our desk drawer and know.
We can do that.
Follow up on that question, and thank you for asking that, Sherry. If some board members are getting together with staff and having happy hour drinks, then what?
As long as there's not a quorum, that's not an issue.
Okay.
Deliberation can occur, so there are interpretations of the act, and there's an old a handful of cases about what constitutes deliberation. And in response to some of those cases, actually the legislature went back and changed the definition of what is deliberation. And it can involve members of the board meeting with staff on specific issues of interest that may be coming before the board. So, for example, you guys don't do these, but contested cases or complex rulemakings.
Right.
If there are issues that you are going to ask for briefings from staff, I mean, serious briefings,
Yes.
not social events like going out and having lunch, that fits in the social exception as well. But if you're going to have detailed briefings, I think it would be helpful if you let Mike or Holly know, and we can determine whether it fits that definition of deliberation, because it gets fairly complex at that point, and you actually have to look at
I understand.
cases
I'm
and
just
things.
talking about in terms of, say, Mike, a few of us wanted to take you out for drinks after something. If that's allowable.
It
Okay,
is.
the reason I'm asking that, at what point in time does it ever become consideration that, let's say we're going to evaluate him or evaluate whomever on their performance, and we have already established a relationship that's a social relationship? Are we just counting on ourselves to separate objectivity from subjectivity?
That's not something that's governed by the Open Meetings Act. I mean, that's not what I'm here to talk about. It may fall within some of the issues that Holly's going to cover here in a minute. In fact, I think it probably does. But for the act, back to the social meeting exception, and we'll try to crystallize some, short guidance for you guys.
That would be great. Would be a short guidance on that.
But I think that would meet the social meeting exception, what you're talking about. And again, the subject matter is not an issue for the Open Meetings Act. The relationship issue may be a conflict of interest or duality of interest issue.
Manager Jones?
There's just one quick question. You mentioned under staying on subject, the board may only discuss items that have been posted on the official agenda for a meeting. You mentioned there's 3 exceptions. Fact, they can reschedule the item. And what was the second one?
Discussion or mention of specific existing policies. So you can say, we have a policy that covers this, and it says, that may sound like fact, but it's really, you're taking what they're talking about and applying something to it. So it's sort of a little bit different than just fact.
If the public makes a comment during public session, we can do those 3 things.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
And if I may, Dr. Zamora, I apologize for jumping in the middle. I know you're all used to seeing your motion sheets in front of you when the meeting begins, but we just finished our pre-meet with Dr. Zamora and Vice Chair Greenberg, and we made some changes to those. So I'm going to scurry off while Holly is talking and make some changes to that and bring them back. So thank y'all.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Steve. Agenda item 2C, training on the conflict of interest reporting requirements under the Central Health Board of Managers bylaws, policies, and Texas law. Holly.
Good afternoon. I think David may have oversold my presentation a little bit.
That's okay.
I am actually covering today specifically the conflict of interest reporting statutes. And the reason that I'm covering the statutes is because not too long ago, you all had a compliance training with Patty Miller where you went through some of the conflict of interest and duality of interest policy. The posting is broad enough that if you have a question about the policy, we could talk about it, but that is not something I'm covering in depth tonight in my slides. So just to give you an overview of what we are covering, 2 different local government code chapters, which is Chapter 171 and Chapter 176. And then I'll briefly discuss, but I don't have a specific slide, on Government Code Chapter 2252. And finally, there are some penal code provisions that we'll talk about just briefly. So starting with Local Government Code Chapter 171, this chapter establishes the standard for determining whether an individual on a board, like yourself, has a conflict of interest. And there are 3 elements to determining whether a conflict of interest exists. So first, the individual has to have a substantial interest in a business entity or real property. If that is met, then the second prong is Central Health has to be taking a vote or other action on a matter that would affect your business entity or your real property. If that is met, a third condition has to be in place. So there are a lot of prongs to this, and that is that the vote or action would result in what is known as a special economic effect on either your business or the real property, and that interest must be distinguishable from the effect on the public. So I will kind of dive into some of this because that was a lot in one slide. First of all, who is a local public official? Because that's who Chapter 171 applies to. So a local public official is a member of the governing body, or it could be another officer of a special purpose district such as Central Health, who exercises responsibilities beyond those that are advisory in nature. So Mike, for example, would be a local public official. Some of our executives here on staff would also be local public officials. And of course, I've indicated at the bottom what's relevant to you is that you are all local public officials. Let's talk a little bit about relatives and which relatives are useful. Well, not useful, that's not the right word. Useful for me because I'm determining whether that relative I've been in bike labs, so I have accomplished something today.
I have a few who aren't useful. I'm just kidding. I have a lot of unuseful relatives.
Me too, Cynthia.
They show up at Christmas
Yeah, whenever there's money around.
So, which relatives are considered close enough to you that they would have, if they had an interest in property or a business, you would need to take into consideration for disclosing conflicts? So you're going to take into consideration on the blood side of your family, first degree, second degree, and third degree relationships, and I've listed out what those are for you. And then on the affinity side, which is by marriage, you're looking at the first degree and second degree relationships, all of which are probably useful, just for the record. Definitions continued. We know now what a local public official is. What is a business entity? Sometimes this gets confusing for our board members who serve on state agencies or serve as employees at state agencies, because a business entity is actually a sole proprietorship, a partnership, a corporation, a stock company, a receivership, a trust, or any other entity recognized by law as a business entity. You'll note there that it does not include things like cities, counties, school districts, or even universities. A substantial interest in a business entity would exist under these three circumstances. So you would have to own 10% or more of the voting stocks or shares of the business entity. You would have to own the same percentage or more, or $15,000 or more of the market value of the business entity. Or finally, you would have to have funds received by the entity in excess of 10% of your gross income to have a substantial interest in a business entity. So turning to that last prong of special economic effect, this is something that the statute does not define. Case law and the Attorney General have said it's an issue of fact that requires investigation, and the AG has given you a few examples. So being employed by a business entity will prevent a local public official from discussing or voting on a contract that involves the business entity. In all other cases, it's up to you to determine whether you think your action would have a special economic effect on the business entity or on the value of real property. Of course, pursuant to our policies, legal is here to help you determine whether it may have a special economic effect on your business or your property. So what happens when you think that a conflict could exist? Here's the steps we recommend. So first, let the board chair know, and then let legal counsel know. And the reason that we ask you let legal counsel know is because a legal counsel prepares an affidavit for you. This is a requirement of the statute that any time the board were to take a vote or action on an item, you would fill out an affidavit before that point. You would abstain from participation in the matter, which includes discussion but doesn't prevent you from listening or observing silently. And abstain from any vote on the matter. And then I would provide the affidavit to the official record keeper of the governmental entity on your behalf. Okay, so now on to Local Government Code Chapter 176. Generally speaking, like 171, we are concerned in 176 about financial conflicts, not maybe social conflicts or personal relationships. So Chapter 176 requires a local government officer, and there's a slightly different definition in this chapter, to file a conflicts disclosure statement when the local governmental entity has entered or is considering entering into a contract with a vendor who the local government officer has, and here's that family member again, formed an employment or other business relationship, and that relationship must result in taxable income in excess of $2,500 during the 12-month period preceding the date that the officer becomes aware of the contract or proposed contract. I'm hoping by the wordiness here, we're starting to get a feel for why all of our processes encourage you to contact legal, because there's so many elements to this. Another thing that could be considered disclosable is gifts worth more than $100 during the 12-month period preceding the date the officer becomes aware of the contract or proposed contract. And there are some exceptions. Political contributions and food at an event are not considered gifts. And then a family relationship is a little different under this chapter. So let's take a look at our family relationships in just a second. But I'll skip forward there now because I said I would do that. Here, it's just parent, child, spouse, in-laws, or a child of your spouse by a previous or subsequent relationship. Who is a local government officer? This is a member of the governing body of a local government entity. That's the same, but it also includes a director, a superintendent, an administrator, a president, or other person designated as the executive officer, and any agent of a local governmental entity who exercises discretion in the planning, recommending, selecting, or contracting of a vendor. So Central Health's purchasing staff, for instance, would be a local government officer under this chapter. I wanted to focus just a little bit on gifts of political contributions because it's that time. A local government officer is not required to file a conflicts disclosure statement for a political contribution accepted by the officer or a family member of the officer. Just a side note, despite not having to fill out a conflict of interest statement form, political contributions could implicate the Central Health Compliance Policy 009 to the extent that they could be perceived to influence an officer's actions. Other gifts. A gift is defined as any benefit offered by a person. The term does include food, lodging, transportation, and entertainment accepted as a guest. The term excludes a benefit offered on account of kinship or personal, professional, or business relationship that was formed either prior to or independent of your role as a board member. What do you do if you think that a Chapter 176 conflict exists? You'll complete a conflict of interest statement. Most of you did that at the annual compliance training with the official record keeper of the governmental entity no later than 5 p.m. on the 7th business day after the local government officer becomes aware of the conflict. So just because you filled something out at the compliance training does not mean you don't have to fill it out again if you see in our backup that there's a new contract and that contract is with someone whom you have a familial or business relationship. A conflict of interest questionnaire is filed with our purchasing supervisor by both the local government officer and the vendor, and we put those on our website as required by law. This is what the form looks like. Most of you have filled this out, but if you get that again, you will know what it is. Some odds and ends. Section 36.02 of the Texas Penal Code criminalizes a public official accepting, agreeing to accept, soliciting any benefit as consideration for decision, opinion, recommendation, vote, or other exercise of official discretion. A benefit is anything that a reasonable person would consider to have some monetary value. There is no dollar amount that makes a benefit a per se potential bribe. So you can't say, well, it was only $50 or it was only $100. Any amount would be suspect. There's no temporal limitation. So one thing that has happened is people tried to accept the bribe after a decision was made, but there is no temporal limitation. So you can't first decide and then ask for the money. Practical advice. I would recommend that you always review the names of the business entities that Central Health has or is considering entering into a contract with. We do try to provide you with a list of contracts most months. I know sometimes you've missed that, but there is a list, I believe, in tonight's backup materials. Ask questions of legal. I know we do cost a little bit of money to you, but we can help you avoid those criminal penalties and also stay in compliance with our policies. Please don't solicit gifts or any other form of benefit, such as donations for your personal use, and particularly those things that may be influencing your decisions. If you receive an unsolicited benefit, which has happened here at Central Health over the past few days because of the holiday time, you should donate the benefit to a recognized tax-exempt charitable organization formed for educational, religious, or scientific purposes. Now, that sounds great, but one thing that I like to tell people, what about those consumable things that go bad? What should you do with those? So one thing I've heard the comptroller's office say is if you receive a I guess a box of cookies is a good example, and they're going to go bad and you won't have time to donate them. You could put them in your break room, not indicate who they're from, and anyone is able to come and take those cookies. Questions?
Attorney Jones?
So should I remove this from this table and put it someplace else? Because or is this from us to take?
That is from Central Health. So I don't think Central Health is going to influence your actions or decisions on a particular vendor.
But I don't know where these flowers, they're beautiful as they are, came from.
They came from Central Health, is my understanding.
Central Health grew them?
Central Health purchased them.
Right, so
To
the
give to
vendor
us.
from whom you purchased it from is a vendor to
There's
whom
nobody
we
that we
make
have
it.
in place, correct?
I'm sorry?
I'm not trying to be facetious.
Oh,
I'm
of
just saying,
course.
I agree with you. The uniquenesses of all the entrees that we enter into makes it very problematic and difficult. So that's why I call you whenever I need you
Yeah.
and ask your advice.
So I do not have an answer to which vendor we purchase these flowers from, but I have a feeling I know who does. Home Depot.
They're not on this list.
So just one other question. And it goes to the personal, because I see on this vendor a personal vendor that I use, that I don't contract with, but is a provider of services for me. So would that constitute a conflict too?
It would not constitute a conflict under either of the chapters we discussed tonight, Chapter 171 or 176. If you felt that your business relationship outside of a Central Health may compromise any decisions on a contract that was brought forward to you, it may be a duality of interest that I would recommend you abstain from voting on.
But, may I ask a question?
Yes.
So if there was, for instance, a physicians group on here that somebody used to go, that somebody on this board went to that physicians group for medical care, is that a problem?
Not under the two statutes we talked
Okay.
about today.
Okay.
That's where my question was going to.
I know who it is, I think.
Yeah, that's because the doctors aren't paying us to see them.
Right, exactly, but I think I knew his question, and, yeah.
Attorney Valdez?
The only thing I wanted to offer is if anybody needed a place to donate food to, they can go any day, any time of the hour, any time of the day, 24 hours a day, to Casa Marianela, which provides services to refugees and to those that have no status here. And those are the people that are the least of our brothers that don't have access to anything. So put that on a possible donation list.
Great. I believe they are a nonprofit, so they would be
They
eligible.
are. Right down the street.
Questions?
I have some, but I'll meet and talk with you.
Of course. So what I would like to do now is, as a requirement of the annual meeting, we ask you to fill out the annual conflict information statement. So I will pass that around. I do think we have some time before the 5:30 citizens communication start time for you to fill that out and ask me questions about the form if you have them.
How are you doing? I still haven't had that lunch, but I miss holiday season. So
It's been so crazy. I thought I had an extra week. And I just,
school starts back.
January's much better.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we start until the 22nd.
Okay.
And I teach Thursdays, and that's the next one.
I've already paid. Okay. I
Just
want
thought-
to for that again.
Here's an extra pen for.
I borrowed mine, so I'm going to take one home.
Yes, you need to, yes. There you go. Thanks.
Managers, if you want to stand down for a minute, there's food next door. We'll get a plate to eat.
And I also made some little treats that I brought this evening,
Oh,
so
those are delicious.
I had to.
Fantastic. That one?
Yes.
That was delicious.
This is my
I'm
meal
glad you
for
liked
the
it.
day.
Take more, because I don't take it.
And from whence did you purchase them? So I know it wasn't.
I made them myself.
Oh, you made.
In my own kitchen. And I purchased the ingredients at a combination of
Food yourself.
Randall's and Central Market, I believe, yes. But yes, I baked them in my own kitchen, in my own house, so you're good.
Give more.
There's a lot of them. A lot of.
Well, I have one that will maybe recur, so
Oh.
that's what I want to do. That's gonna be mine.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jump into the front of the line of dialysis.
We're going to reconvene the Board of Managers meeting. The next item of business is citizens communications. Anise, Ivan. We do have a list.
Stand by, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ivan.
Good evening, Board. My name is Ivan Davila. Hi, everyone. My name is Ivan Davila. I'm Communications and Community Engagement here at Central Health. We've got one person signed up to speak, and his name is Larry Wallace. And he's familiar with our public hearing and communication, citizens communication guidelines.
Good evening. My name is Larry Wallace, and I'm here to speak to an item that's posted on the agenda, policy number HR 2-018. And I'm in support of modification and the creation of a process to address executive level work complaint resolution beyond CEO level within 45 days when an employee assert a complaint that disciplinary action was improper or unfair. I believe that staff deserves it and the community expects it, and everybody will be better off with that modification. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace.
We've got two more people here to speak. Ms. Barbara Scott with the Colony Park Neighborhood Association.
Hello. As I catch my breath as I run through the door, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I stood before you in October to express our community's concern about hearing of the forced retirement of Mr. Larry Wallace, the highest ranking African American in the employee of Central Health. Austin has the distinct displeasure of being known as a city divided, race, class, financial equity, and health outcomes, to name a few issues that divide Austin. We are now facing inequity and disparity within Central Health hierarchy with the unfortunate loss of Mr. Wallace. We no longer have our champion that worked tirelessly to bring health care to Colony Park and the Eastern Crescent. It takes years to build trust within disenfranchised communities. Who does Central Health have to continue Mr. Wallace's work? Mr. Wallace's dedication in providing for these members of society that have been inherently left out and left behind. Will there be a national search for Mr. Wallace's replacement? When will it begin? It will be very difficult to replace someone with Mr. Wallace's knowledge and character. What will you as a board do to ensure that Mr. Wallace's work continues as intended and not be dismantled from within the confines of Central Health? What can you do as a board to ensure that equity for all of Austin? Are you a board in name only? Or will you pick up the torch that Mr. Wallace has carried, the torch that has grown dim by decisions created by Central Health Management? I have a copy for each of you. I would just like to say it's very difficult as a community leader to find someone that is willing to come into our communities and to help us as Mr. Wallace has done. I'm looking forward to having that again. We're working on it. I talked with Mr. Giesland, back to have a conversation with him tomorrow coming up, but I still haven't found that fit. I need that fit for my community, to feel that I can be able to trust what is being done and that it's being done for the betterment of my community and not because it looks good on a piece of paper. Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Helen Miller, also with the Colony Park Neighborhood Association.
Good afternoon to board members. I'm here because I have just a few questions. Mr. Larry Wallace has worked with the Colony Park Lakeside Neighborhood community, tirelessly. He's been to all of our neighborhood association meetings, all of the events that have occurred in our community. And I'm having a problem with his forced retirement. Was he forced to retire because he was doing a good job in helping us in our community, or he wasn't doing a good job? And that's my question. Also, I'm not understanding why you want to fix something that wasn't even broke. And I have a problem with that. And we were moving so good. And we've had to fight real hard for what we have accomplished so far in Colony Park. And with the help of Mr. Wallace and his previous staff, tirelessly, City Hall, City Council, I'm just having a real problem. Is this a political move or what is it? Because at the end of the day, it's our community, the most vulnerable community, and the children that are in our community that it's making a big impact on. So you're making all these decisions, but are you making the right decision? And I'm still not understanding it. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
This concludes citizens' communication for the evening.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Jones.
I have a question for the attorney regarding community comment.
Our attorney?
Yes. I want to make sure perhaps I misunderstood the comments earlier. Do we have an opportunity as public and citizen communication to seek facts on questions that were presented here?
That was what Mr. Duncan presented as part of his presentation, yes.
Okay, so would I be appropriate to ask of the CEO to provide for information to the questions that were asked by members of the community?
I think to the extent the questions help you decide what future agenda item you would like to place onto an agenda, yes.
Okay, so I'd like to ask the CEO, what plan, what strategies do we have to address the issues that were presented by the members of the audience who spoke at Citizen Communication with regards to the future of Colony Park, regarding the significant underserving of that community? Could you speak to those facts?
Yes, sir. And some of this will also be covered in the subsequent agenda posting that's in the packet as well. But with respect to Colony Park, we're going to continue to have a full measure of a team to carry on the work that was committed back in the prior budget session, not only to have the short-term solutions implemented and in some cases corrected and improved upon, but also working towards a longer-term solution. Those are still priority areas for us, and I'm assuming they're still priority areas for the board as well, because they're spelled out on the budget resolution. And so that work will continue, again, with a full measure of a team effort with multiple persons working on it, and I'm very much involved with that as well. Second, with respect to any future personnel actions, I'll be addressing that after the beginning of the new year.
Okay, so the second part of the question I want to ask, so can we reschedule for another time this further discussion and invite the community in to discuss that? Discuss the plans for...
That's the prerogative of the board. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think, so just to make sure I'm understanding your question, you would like to know if you can have a deliberation on when the next meeting will be scheduled to consider the community's feedback on the particular issue of Colony Park?
To consider and respond to the particular questions that were raised here tonight, because it was not just about what it is we're going to do with regards to building a team. It's what is being done based upon what currently has been done. Mr. Wallace has been a leader in this community. He's brought a lot of significant changes, and what I heard from the community tonight is that they're frustrated that once again, as an African American community of color, has been left out because of an administrative decision. So the question is, what are they going to do here from this board or from the administration to address those issues? And so I'm asking at a future time, can you have a litany of those specific things you're going to do to address their need, their questions?
Yes, sir. And some of that will be it's in a subsequent agenda item this evening. And we'll continue to elaborate on it as much as we need to, because it's important.
Okay.
I'm sorry, you mean a subsequent agenda item in today's meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
But I was asking at future meetings and just today.
We'll continue to elaborate absolutely as much as we need to.
Any further questions?
I just wanted to know if there's an ability to set a timeline for that. A specific timeline for that. I think that the people here in the audience would appreciate knowing that. Is it possible to do or not?
So you're asking, yeah, I'm sorry. You're asking if there can be a discussion of or a announcement of the date at which the meeting will be set.
Yes, a specific time or date, so that the public can know about this. I don't know, is that part of the policy?
I think you can
Or do we have
express that you would like to see that on a specific agenda. And then, of course, management would have to tell you whether they have enough information to bring that item back to you on that date.
Well, then I'd like to make sure that it's done as quickly as possible.
Mr. Jones?
And I'd like to specify Colony Park and not just the Eastern Crescent, because what I heard is the communities from Colony Park here. I'm not saying that the other ones are not interested or that they're not interested, because he's made a significant impact in that whole area. In fact, the word Eastern Crescent comes from the work that he began. And so I think that, but particularly for Colony Park, I think we need to be able to address, have a time in which we report back to the community what we're going to do for Colony Park. Not just the Eastern Crescent, but specifically Colony Park. So I don't know if that's going to be in your presentation this evening or not.
There is a memo in your packet that provides some detailed information on Colony Park, and it's part of the agenda item this evening. But again, I certainly think that
on an ongoing basis.
On an ongoing basis, we can come back and should address this, because it's a stated priority in our budget resolution.
January board meeting?
In addition and beyond.
Yeah, it may be something where you could have kind of a standing update at every board meeting, for instance, particular to Colony Park.
We provided an update at the last board packet. And then, of course, we'll do it in this meeting, and then we can continue to do it as a standing item.
That's what I was saying, yes, as a standing item. Have an update specific to Colony Park.
Any other, Madam?
No disrespect to Colony Park, because I 1,000% support everything that they're saying today. But I do and am interested in the rest of the Eastern question. But I'd like to make sure that that's Colony Park is specifically addressed as the others. So just, I don't know how you get around it except to say, well, we continue doing what we've been doing.
Right.
Because I understand that in the reports that have been made to us, it has been a comprehensive report with respect to all of the Eastern Crescent, including Colony Park. As a matter of fact, I think that's always like the first one because.
Just a reminder, we're trying to keep the discussion to when we would schedule the next meeting on that topic.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
And
Manager Jones.
I would just like to say, it may not be consistent with this, but I'll go on the record saying, on behalf of at least me as a board member, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Wallace, for the leadership you've done in addressing the issues, particularly of Black communities of the Eastern Colony Park included, but particularly the entire area. This board, previous board, or this agency would not have been there had it not been for your leadership. So I'd like to publicly acknowledge that for the record.
In addition, you as a person of color on the leadership team for Central Health, when there were no others, is especially important historically for us to keep in mind and to pay attention to with respect to Central Health.
Any further discussion? All right, speakers, on behalf of the Board of Managers, I'd like to thank you for being here and sharing your concerns. Please know that we hear you and we sincerely value your opinions. However, Central Health will not discuss a sensitive personal matter in a public forum. This matter will be handled according to Central Health's policies and procedures. Thank you. All right. No other questions? We'll go on to the consent agenda. Members, the manager has asked the consent agenda item C4 be moved to the regular agenda. That item will be considered just after the consent agenda is approved. C1, approve the minutes of November 20th, 2019 meeting of the Central Health Board of Managers and December 2nd, 2019 meeting of the Central Health Ad Hoc Board of Officer Nominations Committee. C2, receive and ratify Central Health investments for November 29, 2020. C3, approve the fiscal year 2019 broker-dealer applicants for conducting investment business with the Travis County Healthcare District as recommended by the Travis County Cash Investment Management Department. And C5, approve the recommendation made by the Ad Hoc for Board of Officers Nominations Committee regarding the board secretary position and appoint Ms. Cynthia Valdez as board secretary for a term to begin January 2020. Do I hear a motion?
Appointment of Ms. Cynthia Valdez as secretary.
Second.
Okay, so we have.
Get our other consent agenda items.
What's that?
C1 through C5.
C1 and C5.
Did I miss one?
Oh,
Yes.
I moved.
Okay, so she needs to tell which ones.
What?
Okay. This is C1
I
through.
didn't even see it.
I moved that the board approve consent agenda items C1 through C3 and C5.
Okay.
A second.
Okay. We have a motion by Manager Greenberg, seconded by Manager Oliver. Any discussion? Seeing, yes.
Just clarification. C1 through C3 and through 5, and not including C4, that's separate?
That's been pulled.
That's been pulled, okay.
C4 has been pulled.
C4 has been pulled by one of the managers. They'll take that up as a regular agenda item.
May I ask who pulled it?
I don't know.
Is that not public information?
So I would ask that if the board member who wanted that to be pulled felt like identifying, they could. There's nothing in our bylaws that states a specific member can't ask for it or that I have to disclose the identity of that person.
So you're saying that I could pull an item and not admit that I pulled it?
That is the way our bylaws are written, yes.
For clarification purposes, I have asked for things to be pulled in the past historically, and I think other board members have asked sometimes that items be pulled from the agenda, but we do it during the meeting. I didn't know that we could do it any other time. Is that a practice?
It has happened where board members have voiced concern about a specific agenda item prior to the meeting date, but after the posting.
Can I call for the question on the existing
Okay, call
motion?
question. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor for a call question by Manager Valdez, seconded by Manager Greenberg. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right.
And
Questions
noes?
called, so now.
Did you ask
let's-
for nays?
Nays, you're gonna abstain or?
Well, nay, I don't think we should be voting
Anyone
on
else?
it.
Any abstentions? Motion passes. All right, so now we have the motion, the original motion on the consent agenda. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All against? Any abstentions?
I'm
Motion-
abstaining, not voting against it.
You're abstaining? Let the record show that the Manager Jones abstained. Motion passes. All right, regular agenda, C4, approve the candidate recommendations made by the ad hoc board officer nominations for the following officer positions and elect recommended candidates for terms to begin January 2020. Chairperson, Ms. Cherry Greenberg. B, Vice Chairperson, Dr. Charles Bell. And C, Treasurer, Ms. Julie Oliver. Do I hear a motion?
I so move.
Yeah, good. A second? Is there a second?
Second.
Second? All right, so we have a motion by Manager Valdez, seconded by Manager Zuniga. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All against say no. Any abstentions? Okay. Motion passes. You have elected Chairperson Greenberg, Vice Chairperson Dr. Bell, and Treasurer Oliver. Thank you. Thank you for your leadership, guys.
I want to thank the executive team and the nominations committee for their work on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Early. Agenda item 5, discuss and take appropriate action on the proposed calendar year 2020 meeting dates and times for the Central Health Board of Managers. Members, there's a proposed FY 2020 calendar and memo prepared by staff in your backup materials that outlines community feedback on moving the date and time of the regular board meetings, as well as some reasons that our meetings have been held on Wednesday evenings. Based on that feedback, staff is recommending that we do not change the meeting date of the regular meetings. However, a later start time for citizen communications could be considered. Pedro Cavazos and Ted Burton are available to answer any questions members may have about contents of the memo and the calendar. Do y'all have the motions in front of you? There's several motions that you could use.
What page is that item on, sir? I have quite a lot of
That's item
documents.
5.
It's on 104.
Thank you.
Yeah, what begins on 105.
If we're going to change the order of our, it would be helpful if we could at least identify the pages of the items which we're going to.
I did at the beginning of the meeting. I think you were out of the
I
room.
stepped away, okay.
What's that? You want me to go back and read those again?
I'll get them from another board member.
I can tell you again.
Do one more time.
All right.
'Cause I did-
All right, here we go. After, we'll take up the regular remaining agenda items in the following order. Items 5 through 9, item 15, item 3, item 11, item 10, and finally items 12 through 14. Yeah, 10? You get it?
Yeah.
All right. All right. You want to read the motion? how we discussed it. We need the second one.
alternative too. Sure. Let me find it.
Got it?
Yes, this one.
Yeah, I think that would be the best one.
Let's see. I move that the board adopt the proposed calendar year 2020 meeting dates and times, but direct the president and CEO to bring back to the board as soon as possible recommended alternative days for one or more meetings, and to find a suitable location to hold at least one board meeting in eastern Travis County, and to look at, when it comes to budget time, whether we need additional meetings, and to look at whether we need to have a later start time to our meetings, perhaps a 6 o'clock, to accommodate people's schedules with traffic, to be able to get to our meetings and participate in citizens' communications and in the meetings.
Second.
Sorry for the lengthiness.
Or for adding stuff.
Any discussion? Manager Valdez.
I just would like to offer a suggestion that when y'all are discussing this, and we're talking about the citizens communication component, that a lot of times citizens communication is addressing specific issues that are on agenda, or agendas that are important to the community. Not to say that everything is important, or that there are some higher priority than others, but that is in fact the case. So if we're going to change the citizens communication time, I would recommend that they take into consideration the fact that a later citizens communication should not be after important decisions such as adoption of the budget, or anything. Issues with respect to the Eastern Crescent, growing locations of community care, things that were citizen or Central Health clinics, and contracts that we're going to be entering into. So if the citizens communication could occur prior to those, if we were going to do it at a later time, or if we're going to keep the same time and do citizens communication at a different time, please just make sure that whatever information, generic information, agenda items, we can put those to the front so that we can have citizens communication prior to agenda items that might be important, especially important to the community. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's the way I would want it to be. So, unless we move back the time completely.
So I think I said
to ask the CEO
to ask the CEO to look at a later time, such as 6 o'clock, to accommodate traffic and citizens communication. May I amend that and just say, and ask the CEO to look at both what would be an appropriate start time for our meetings given traffic and people's schedules, and what would be the appropriate time for citizens communication. Does that work, Manager?
That's fine. You didn't have to amend your motion. I was just asking that they take that into consideration.
I wanted to make sure that we reflected everybody's wishes for what we want our CEO to consider.
Any other questions? Seeing none. All in.
Second.
Okay, so we have Manager Greenberg's amended motion and seconded by Manager Valdez. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
Mr. Chair, point of where is item 3 on our list for tonight?
Item 3 will be...
After 15.
Yeah, it'll be after 15.
It's citizens communication 5 through 9, 15, then 3, before 11.
Is there any reason we moved that to that point?
Okay, so they're going to post it back up on the wall.
Okay, but is there any reason we moved it that far down? I think there was a significant item in terms of item 3 that would be very valuable to the to our discussion to the community as well, and to put it at the end of the agenda, I would think would be problematic for people who are sitting to come specifically to that. So if anything went into the decision to do that?
I'm sure there was. Madam Council, do you?
So it's completely up to the chair and the board's discretion what order they take the meeting. I think some factors that went into the decision were that there were open and closed sessions that we were trying to keep grouped together so that you wouldn't have to go in open session, then kick everyone out, go into closed session, and then bring them back in and do open session. But this is not a permanent agenda order. You may, of course, shift the agenda items around.
Given the nature of that item and given the nature of what we've discussed here tonight, I think it would be appropriate to have it in the presence, at least the general discussion that can be held with the public here.
I agree.
At now, as opposed to putting it to 8 or 9 o'clock this evening.
Do I need to have a motion for that, or just?
No, you can just move it.
Okay. All right, is that the board's?
Consensus?
Yes,
All right.
yes, I think.
All right, so we'll go to agenda item 3. Consider and take appropriate action on Central Health Human Resources Policy 2-018 and Compliance Policy 008. Staff of the Travis County Attorney's Office will be present during this in closed session. Are we going to have open session? All closed session. All right, so I announce the board is convening in closed session to discuss agenda item 3 under section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code, consultation with attorney. In addition to our Travis County Counsel, Ms. Willard may attend the closed session.
Item 3 is, yeah.
Interesting that we,
All right. Today's December 18th, 2019. It is 6:45. We're coming out of executive session on agenda item 3. I'm going to go ahead and reread the agenda item. Consider and take appropriate action on Central Health Human Resources Policy 2-018 and Compliance Policy 008. Do we have everybody back in the room?
I don't know.
Did everybody leave?
I don't know.
Yeah,
Did everybody leave from outside?
there's a few people.
Okay, well, whatever, we're back.
We're back.
Everyone's back, okay. Okay. Is it ready?
The public is left.
Yeah.
Okay. Manager Jones, would you like to read this motion since?
Yes. Okay. I move that the board refer the reference complaint resolution policy to an ad hoc committee that includes the executive committee for further review, and further move that the executive committee, of which the ad hoc committee will participate, provide the board with recommendations on any necessary amendments, modifications, or revisions to these policies no later than the next available board meeting.
Do I hear a second? Okay, Manager Jones made a motion, seconded by Manager Valdez. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against? Any abstentions? Seeing none, motion passes. So, we'll come up with a date. Holly?
Correct. I think they will poll immediately to find out when people are available.
Yes, I'd like to take the nominations for the ad hoc committee. Who would like to be on the ad hoc committee?
Nominate Shannon.
Okay.
Or Manager Jones.
So we'll have Manager Jones and Manager Valdez, along with any executive committee members. Thank you. All right, we're going back to the regular agenda item then?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry, I'm lost. We're going back to 6. All right, agenda item 6, discuss and take appropriate action on the information related to Central Health enterprise compensation philosophy and workforce demographics. Members, as you recall, in October when Susan Willard presented the compensation information. The board raised questions regarding Central Health's peer group. The backup material for this item suggests the hiring of a consultant who will help update the compensation philosophy, which has not been done since 2007. It will also help define the peer group for Central Health. Ms. Willer is available for any questions regarding the materials on this item in the backup. If there are no questions, I will kindly ask for a motion.
I have questions.
Sue?
What,
Go.
okay, thank you. What is the base wage, the minimum wage that we pay to people starting for any, I mean, any, like grade 5, grade 6, whatever? What is the?
So, okay, give me 1 second, I've got my. I'm sorry, I didn't bring my grades, my salary grades with me, but the federal minimum wage is $7.27.
Right.
We are, I believe, we don't pay less than $13 and, 60-some cents.
So I would like to move that we have a $15 per hour base wage. Because this is not an affordable city. And when I look at these, I mean, it looks like people are getting paid 14, 13. I mean, even 15 is arguable in Austin. But, this whole thing came about for me because I was looking at average salary and I realized the executive salary skews things up. But I also realized there are people that are being left behind in our enterprise who are not even making a living wage here in Austin. And this has nothing to do with y'all. It's just something as a board that I would like for us to consider, that we move to make a $15 per hour base wage, starting base wage and nobody gets paid less than that in our enterprise.
And I think the living wage is $13.21. It was last year, just to clarify that.
Well, I would still move that we follow like the city's recommendation, 15 an hour.
Okay. The agenda item is about directing staff to hire someone for.
Right. Can we add a motion to this since it's about?
So I do think that the way that the posting is written today, our motion has to be related to either the compensation philosophy or workplace demographics. But perhaps there's a creative way to state that in the compensation philosophy, you would like them to consider.
Yeah, in the compensation philosophy, I really would like y'all to consider
Minimum pay increase.
a minimum
back
pay
on
of
the-
15 per hour.
Minimum pay or living wage, because those are two different.
15 an hour to begin. And
What
as
is
a-
living in Austin, Texas? It's relative. It's
that's a
almost
base.
a relative issue.
It is. It's
So remember, it's just for the sake of making sure that we know what the scope of work might look like relative to the amendment that will be discussed here. Is it, I mean, you can put 15 base in, but you want to see how it affects other partners in the enterprise?
well,
Or
I
you
mean,
want to see what?
we're getting
the-
enterprise specific
How
data.
that would change the scale if we
I
went
mean-
that direction.
No, I want us to adopt that we move
Enterprise.
in that. And yeah, it's great to have a consultant come in and reevaluate everything that we're doing, but I mean, this is.
It's not really relative to the scope of work for a consultant to come in, it's just,
No,
you
this
would
would
just like to
be in
move
addition
adoption.
to our compensation philosophy.
Okay.
So I mean, in my opinion, it almost seems like there are two different motions here, one for the compensation consultant, but the other one directed towards our compensation philosophy. And knowing that Austin is not an affordable city and we are leaving our own employees behind, a $2 or even $1.50 an hour annual increase means the world to some families.
Certainly, but as we're posted for this, can we work that into the original motion?
Well, I'll take Holly's recommendation.
Yeah, so the one thing I will caveat, and I'm glad that Susan and Betsy are here, is I don't know currently what is in the compensation philosophy. I don't know what is currently in the compensation philosophy, so perhaps if you could state a little bit about what's in it, I can help you craft a motion for the $15 that you'd like. Thank you.
So the philosophy states that we will set our salary structure at the 50th percentile of the labor markets. That, in a nutshell, is the philosophy.
So I do think, given what is in the compensation philosophy, there is room for that in your motion.
So do you want us to give an assessment of what this would cost? Because once you set the base at 15, it moves everybody based on the structure that we have. And then we'll have to share the data with, Community Care, Sendero, because it'll affect them as well.
I think we need to move to this. I really do. Regardless, I mean, and I know we have to be stewards of what we have, but that also means that we take care of the people who work for us and not just the people at the top.
Are you saying for this fiscal year?
I am saying for this fiscal year.
Okay, members, I think absent a fiscal impact on this, we need to get that in front of you. And I'm not saying that you can't go there, you certainly can, but we need to see how this will affect Community Care and people, what they budgeted for salaries and benefits this year. And maybe move, and ultimately, it's the board's prerogative that if they want to set that philosophy at this, I'm not sure how it works with the other enterprise partners and their boards, but that way we can move necessary funds around if that's what's needed to be able to handle this. And I don't know if I'm thinking through all the mechanics here on the spot like I should be. I don't know if Lisa or Jeff would be both here.
Lisa, Jeff, anybody?
No, about the mechanics, I think
You want to come up with something?
I would say it would be great to have the data from Susan's team to calculate the amount. And I would need to see guidance on if we can make changes to another entity's budget.
I think, and let me just say this from a procedural standpoint. Right now, tonight, this is posted for action on the philosophy.
Yes.
Okay, so we also need to come back with the posting. It allows you to take immediate action. And you could set aside any fiscal analysis if you wanted to and just say, no, this is a matter of policy. This is what we want to do. But what I would ask is let us bring that fiscal impact back to you so you can see it. And I don't know how we'll need to real quickly coordinate with Sendero and Community Care to pull something together.
So how about if we take the motion as written and direct staff to bring us back?
I'm fine with that, but I find that sometimes we direct staff and we never see something come back to our agenda. And I'm just not willing to let this one die because this is people making $2,200 a month pre-tax.
Understand, Bill?
And then we know 7.65 has to come out of that for Social Security and Medicare.
Well, this is important to us because we, just as we came back tonight with additional information, because it was the board's request, so we'll come back with this one as well.
What we do at TMA is we tell TMA staff we want this back by this month or next month or the following month.
Then can we commit again to put this as a motion that we would like to see a recommendation of how much this will cost by the January board meeting?
I think so. Can we pull that together?
Could we say just?
We'll have to set some things aside. I mean, it's just some things we just won't be able to do.
Or budget and finance. Yeah, budget and finance is fine too, yeah.
That's sooner than,
Yeah, that's fine.
I think that's the 22nd.
Right.
Yes.
There's two separate things. There's what the consultant will do, and then there's the $15.
So is that okay with you, Manager Oliver?
I'm fine with that.
Could you read the motion?
Yeah. Do I need to make two motions then, Holly?
I think that the motion as is fine as long as there's an acknowledgement from district staff that that is what they're going to bring back in January.
I have a clarification. So the consultant, they will no longer just review the philosophy, is that correct? You're wanting them to take a deeper dive into the structures, or?
I don't know what the consultant was going to do, but what I would like to say is for our enterprise, we pay no less than $15 an hour.
So the board sets the compensation philosophy. So the reason we were saying bring a consultant, and correct me if I'm not characterizing this correctly, Susan, is because the board sets the compensation philosophy, that the consultant would come in, here's some recommendations for, your
I mean,
12-year-old compensation policy.
Right,
In terms
I
of
mean,
updating it. And the board, and the consultant would report to the board on this. Now, you can still pursue the $15 independent of what, or you cannot touch the compensation philosophy if you don't want to.
I do want to touch the compensation philosophy. So I guess what I'm saying is I would like to see across our enterprise that nobody is paid less than $15 an hour. And at the same time, I think there are some things that our consultant needs to dive into as far as equity, as far as gender equity, as far as people of color equity. I mean, like, I would like to see that people who are doing the same work on the same grade get the same pay. And it doesn't matter if somebody is a woman or a man or an African American or
Equal pay-
Caucasian or
equal
whatever,
pay for equal
transgender.
work.
I want to make sure it's equal pay for equal work. That should be our philosophy. And nobody gets paid less than $15 an hour. And I think that that's a good thing for us to want to have as an enterprise, and because we should want to take care of the people who work here.
I just, Susan did let me know that right now the budget for this particular contract wouldn't probably allow for that type of exploration. That doesn't mean we couldn't try to find out where funds might otherwise be available to make that happen. But right now, the funds for this project wouldn't cover all that type of work.
So what does this project cover then?
Just the work with you all in setting the philosophy, trying to find the peer group. There was a lot of discussion in October as to your desire of, who do we compare to? And so this independent consultant would, have that discussion with you and do that research. And change anything else you want in the philosophy verbiage.
I'm sorry, may I address?
Andrew,
Andrew, so, but I think there's two different exercises here. One is, coming in and addressing the philosophy overall, but two is separate, running the fiscal impact on anybody that's under $15 across the enterprise, bringing anybody up to that level, and then running all the necessary calculations out for this fiscal year, and I guess.
We annualize it.
Okay. I don't think we need the consultant to run the fiscal impact.
Is that okay, Julie? Manager Wallace?
I just want to make sure that what I'm reading is correct, and that's going to also take into consideration their experience in the position, because I'm seeing here that there are people with 11 years on the job, and you're just making $36,000. I can have a grade 7, but I want to be able to equate that with the responsibility. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody. What grade? I'm glad that you have the grades here, but I don't know what that means. Okay, I want to know what it means with respect to responsibilities, job duties. What are we talking about? Okay, so to know whether or not that's appropriate for that grade level, taking into consideration also their responsibilities and duties, and then the years of experience in. I mean, at some point in time, this can also be used as I guess an ability for you as our CEO and for the leadership team that's doing strategic planning for Central Health to see whether or not we need to maybe change some things to get better incorporate the changes that are occurring within Central Health. New duties and responsibilities, and having incorporated the CCC, blah, blah, blah. Where are these people going to go, and what are their duties and responsibilities going to be, and what their pay grade was and is going to be. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that is an important consideration as far as I'm concerned.
So in October, we did a presentation for you all and shared with you some of the strategies that we use to place positions. So these positions are benchmarked, which leads us to the peer group discussion that we had, which is why we're recommending an independent consultant. But the positions, even though you don't have the positions that go within those grades, we do a full review on an annual basis to place those within the salary structure.
And again, it's hard to tell from this, but it does seem like, you know, there are quite a few places where there's not a whole lot of experience change, but very, very substantial pay change between males and females and based on race or ethnicity. So, yeah, well, and I think that's what the peer group part was about, was the executive side of things.
So we did a review, and I'm going to turn it over to Betsy because she's our expert in this area, but she did do some analysis on this. And
well, I will say that I looked at various relationships across the board, and I believe you guys have you all, excuse me, have the information that I gathered and we put into the document stating that there is no pattern of any effect of racial or ethnicity, race or ethnicity, as well as gender, having any kind of adding any kind of additional value to the equation of pay grade predicting salary.
So it's just coincidental.
Excuse me?
It's just merely coincidental.
It is not significant. There's no significant relationship, yes, when looking at that relationship as a whole.
Grade 16, one female who's a native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, almost 5.5 years, almost 56,000, and then a white male with 6.5 years of experience, almost making $9,000 more a year than her. And again, it's hard to say because you don't know it, but it just, you know, that's one. If you go, you know, it's
there are a lot of examples that we could pull out of those kinds of things, and I really like to consider those as outliers, because if you look at, for example, grade 7 for the very first page, that consists of 34% of the entire organization, and also 51% of that particular pay grade, which is the largest pay grade of all, encompassing 609 employees out of the total 923. And that grade 7 is evenly distributed across the board as far as years of experience, males, females, race, ethnicity, that kind of thing. So that is, I mean, that's the pattern. That is a very large chunk of the populations and with an even distribution. So hopefully those kinds of patterns will be the ones that will resonate with you all.
Andrew, all those?
One of the things I also do not see is taken into account for some jobs, it's important that you be bilingual or speak more than one language. And I don't see anywhere here that language is taken into consideration. That is a skill, either that person's initial ability to learn to speak English or that person's commitment to learning a different language. And in some positions, it's important that you have that flexibility, especially when it comes to eligibility and things like that. And that's a skill. Okay, do we even take that into consideration for pay? Because it's important. Other agencies do, you know. And I'd like to know whether or not Central Health is equal to other agencies in light of the fact that we're providing healthcare services and making sure that they're eligible for the most basic of human needs, and that is for healthcare. That's going to determine their quality of life. So, Susan, is that taken into consideration anywhere?
If the job requires it, it would be taken into consideration. If the job description doesn't require it, it's not. But back to my point, the positions are placed based on market. And that is how we place them. So, for example, a medical assistant would be benchmarked against other medical assistants. And the language is not part of that, you know, what we look at when we place the positions.
Well,
because
as a case in point, we know that what was presented to us with respect to the population profile of our patients at community care, the majority of them do not speak English. So if the majority of our patients don't speak English, I would assume that there's ability of the medical staff that's addressing the needs or communicating with that patient. They better speak a language that that person, those patients are needing to communicate with them about.
And I think that our Hispanic population for the enterprise
It's not only
is about
Hispanic,
65%.
You know, any of the other languages, but I just wanted to make sure that we're taking those into consideration when we're analyzing the job responsibilities and what is important for someone to serve in that capacity.
Ms. Beasley.
Go ahead, I just wanted to respond to.
No, go ahead.
So members, you asked staff to bring data back to you twice. And so this is our second time to come back and bring you this information. And they've analyzed it under, let the chips fall where they may type approach and using statistically valid methodologies. But understand there's, what we've been doing since 2007 is driven by a market-based pricing philosophy. They're not responsible for this philosophy.
I get that.
Yeah.
I get that.
We are.
Yeah, that's why I'm addressing it.
I think that if we understand, I feel like there's an accusatory tone.
No, there shouldn't be. No, just.
And I need to get that under control because we're willing to answer any and all questions necessary, but we need to make sure that you have your eyes wide open.
No, here's what I want to say. Like, if somebody looks at this and they see that, that's what I want to make sure that we can defend this to the end. Now, it's a different question altogether about $15 an hour that it sounds like we're moving there, but I want to make sure that we can defend anything that gets lobbed at us, and I want to make sure that we have looked at this and there aren't. And if that requires the consultant to come in and say, you know what, we want to make sure that you agree that we aren't discriminating based on gender or race or ethnicity. It's not at all an accusation towards y'all, but I'm just trying to figure out, like, what do we want this to look like, the parameters? And I want to make sure that people can't come to us and say, one, y'all aren't paying your employees enough. It's all sitting at the top. And two, it looks like there's discrimination. That's all I'm saying. People have accused us since I've been here of not being accountable and transparent, and I want us to be, as a board, accountable and transparent.
Understood. I think they're just doing their jobs and trying to answer.
I agree.
Manager Saito?
Thank you, Chair. I was not present during the October meeting, and just glancing through these documents. First of all, I want to thank you all for doing this work, and I want to thank Central Health staff. And I believe the board is fully committed to equity and payment for everyone. I think that's why we're having this discussion here. By no means, I don't think anyone is attacking anyone. I think it's more for clarity reasons. Now, when I also look at this, I think one component is also missing is education. You can have years of experience, but you may not have the educational background. And if you attain a bachelor's degree versus a master's degree, the pay rate will be different based on your education, and you may not have the same years of experience. I feel we should not just focus on the years of experience. We have to also account education, attainment. And I certainly believe that there's always room for improvement, and we need to also, as a board, to signal to our staff our commitment to addressing the inequities in terms of pay in gender or race and ethnicity. And I feel some staff members may feel slightly insecure of these more discussions that we're having, and I hope that we as a board have that commitment that we want to make things better. By no means we want to take away any resources. And if I look at this really it's not very telling. And I appreciate the science, and we need to validate that. And when you said there's not, based on the statistical analysis that you've conducted, that Central Health is not biased in terms of pay across all race and ethnicities, and we can't argue with that. Science is science, and the validity of that data that you've brought. And I appreciate that. And the longer, I'm going to really capture everything. We want to make this a healthy work environment for all. We want to make it an environment that really attracts the top talent. And there's something also more selling about Central Health is the mission that we have. It's not just the pay. And maybe we can think about different ways that we can really motivate some staff members, maybe in terms of retirement, in different ways, that we can maintain our top talent. And that's really what I wanted to say, and I appreciate you all and appreciate everyone else. Thank you.
Manager Jones?
I think that what Member Masachev said goes for all of us. We're all supportive of everything what you're doing. We would hope that you would know that, but if not, we want to reaffirm it here. When I look at, and I'm looking at the higher grades, not necessarily the lower ones, because I agree with my colleague that we do need to address those lower grades. But from grades, if I'm reading this correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, from grades 36 through 43, and these are our top level executives, I assume.
Management and executives.
Right. I see no African Americans at all, with the exception of the one that has just left. And these are our policy makers, the people who are in our community who are out trying to address the disparities that we see. And we're going to be talking about where the agency there are inclusive. And so I'm just saying this is not reflective of that. I'm not going to point fingers, but I do think that one of the things we need to look at is how do we address this disparity in our community. And so I would encourage, as we look at recruitment for replacing those or other positions that fall within this category, that we look at the value that the African American community plays in this in terms of skill sets, knowledge, and background. This is not reflective of that.
Yes, and I greatly appreciate Manager Jones's comments and agree with him 100%, along with Manager Mustafee. However, one of the things I want us to be, as a board, cognizant of is the fact that sometimes, because we raise these issues that some people may be insecure about or sensitive to with respect to languages spoken, need for them to be able to do these on certain jobs, representation of our population that we serve from the top down, which is what we are trying to establish or incorporate as a model of best practices and be the best that we can be as an example for anybody else, because that's what we've been advocating for, almost all of us on this board, that we don't start feeling that because we're raising these issues, there's an accusatory tone, there's any tone, or anything like that that may be connoted as a negative, okay? That we have to step back and consider that those are not words or not sentiments that should be considered and that is being put forth by us as board members. And so much so that at some point in time, it affects the staff's support of us as board members as to whether or not we support them. That's not the case at all. What we are trying to do is highlight to our executives and to our management team that we do need to be reflective and cognizant of these needs to be incorporated into our staff and representative of our population that we serve. We're in a specialty position here. We're not the city of Austin, we're not Travis County. We're a health provider to the most vulnerable population in our county. And our most vulnerable population we know of is poverty, includes those people of poverty, people of color, and people that don't speak the English language. And as a result, those are the most important things that we need to talk about, not secondary or not to be brought up. And everybody says we're accusing them of being racist or of not being supportive of our staff, because that is the opposite of what the truth is. And I think that at some point in time, we need to ourselves understand that that is not the case and make sure that we don't even draw that attention to those concerns or insecurities that somebody may be buying into by even bringing it up. And I really do want to say that, because as soon as we do start doing that, then somebody's going to think that, okay? So I'd like for us to make sure that that is not the case by anybody, not the intent of anyone in this board.
Before the vice chair tells me we need to bring this back, this is not part of the discussion.
I
So,
understand.
Vice Chair.
I'll go ahead and then I'll go.
I just want to highlight, I once had a discussion with Mike a few months ago, I think, or during the summer or so, and he really reiterated his commitment to diversity of his staff, and taking the whole, if you recall that discussion we had, and you wanted it to be led up from the management up, and you wanted to take on the diversity and inclusion task. And that to me was very telling about his commitment to addressing diversity and commitment. We want to address inequities. It comes from the leadership up. And I want to commend you on that. It may not, to some degree, may not be reflective of the staff, but we also have to be very cognizant. Our leader here has only been on the job for only
2.5 years.
2.5 years, and there's a lot that probably his previously had happened, and our leadership should be definitely reflective of the community that we serve. And with that said, there's room for opportunity, there's commitment from the leadership up to bring on diversity and inclusion to all, and we should not dismiss that.
Yes, so thank you very much to all of the staff for your hard work. I know that you took this data set and you're evidence-based and data-based and did a statistical analysis, and I appreciate that. And you have to have enough of a sample in each category to have a statistically valid sample from which to draw conclusions. And I think that's one of the points that you were making to us when you look at a certain grade on here that may only have 2 people. It's, statistically, scientifically, you can't draw a conclusion from that, whereas with a larger one, you were able to scientifically have a large enough sample to draw a conclusion. Is that what you were trying to convey to us?
Very well said, yes.
Okay, so I appreciate that, and I think we all do, that you are looking at statistics. But beyond that, I think that I certainly concur with my colleagues that we all are striving for a representative, diverse, staff from the grades all the way up to executives. That we strive for diversity and inclusion and equity, regardless of anybody's race, gender, ethnicity, age, whatever, all different factors, and that we do want to be reflective. I understand that we have a market to deal with, but when positions are open, that certainly I think the culture does come from the top, that we will take this into account. And I do believe from the bottom of my heart that every single member of this board, of the staff here, and of all of our associated enterprises are united to provide the best health and health care we can for those who need it most. Thank you.
Manager Jones?
Yeah. I just want to say is that we're all saying the same thing. But what you're talking about statistical anomalies, when you have 5 or 6 grades with no population at the top, I'm referring to the top exactly, that is an anomaly.
Right, and that's why, if I may, that's why I was saying that that we do need to address those areas in recruitment to the best of our ability where we see that we don't have the representative workforce that we want.
I guess what I'm saying is this is not a new topic.
That's right.
I've been here 20 years, and we've been, not with this agency, but here in the city of Austin, the whole issue of equity and diversity has been there since the development of this agency. And so to find ourselves 14 years later, we have something that looks like this, I don't think it speaks to, and it's not reflected on you all,
No,
so please don't think I'm talking about you all. I'm talking about the agency's culture, of which several boards have come and gone, of which are responsible, for which we are responsible as well. But if we don't start doing something about it now, it won't get done. We'll be sitting here 5 years from now, or a new board saying the same thing. So we have to start someplace.
And so if I may, that's why I said that the culture does come from the top and the leadership, and I completely and totally concur with you that we need to do whatever is within our power to make sure that where we see that there are gaps or we're not representative in the way we need to be, from our workforce of our population that we need to do whatever we can.
Or are we doing something that encourages or disencourages people to want to work for us that are diverse and that are interested and that are reflective? It's not only what we're doing, but are we doing something that negatively impacts that? And I heard from a community tonight that we are. So I'm saying we need to look in-house at ourselves as well as we talk about this.
Clearly, as, you know,
Can I call a question?
the culture, you know, we do need to make sure that we have a culture that is diverse and inclusive, and that we have a culture, as you said, that would want a diverse workforce to be part of our enterprise, and I completely concur with that.
These are taxpayers too.
I completely concur with that, yes.
Manager Saitov, there's no motion on the floor yet to call. So if you want to make the motion, I would love that.
I'd like my motion to also, which is really just a directive that by the next Budget and Finance Committee, y'all will present the Budget and Finance Committee what it looks like to move to a minimum base wage of $15 an hour across our enterprise.
That's a motion? Incorporating?
Is that a motion, Holly? I don't know.
I think you have to restate it because I'm not quite sure that we captured exactly what you said.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's a directive or it's a motion. So.
You want to direct staff to bring things back.
Yes.
But you would also want to make a motion potentially to do the things that are listed in your draft motion, which is to bring on a consultant to advise on recommendations.
Second.
So I want to direct the staff to bring back to the Budget and Finance Committee meeting in January what it looks like to move to a minimum $15 an hour wage base. And then further, I move that the board direct the staff to procure the services of an outside consultant to advise the board on recommendations to update our compensation philosophy.
I'll second.
I seconded it.
Are you dead?
Yes.
So Manager Oliver makes the motion, seconded by Manager Valdez. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All against? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank y'all.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Okay, agenda item 7, receive and discuss an update on an agreement with Social Finance, Inc. and its subsidiary, PATH LLC, for permanent supportive housing and wraparound services to be provided to the homeless Travis County residents. Holly and Mike. All right, I announce that the board is convening in closed session to discuss agenda item 7 under section 551.085 of the Texas Government Code, governing board of certain providers.
Mr. Chair, I'm
Sorry.
We don't need to go into closed session.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm sorry, I should have caught you earlier.
Sorry, okay.
So, I am ready to present. This morning, you received a memo, which is also in your backup materials.
Sorry about that. That was my mistake. I apologize.
So the backup memo is the same as what was sent this morning.
Okay.
And
Sorry.
the
We are open sessions.
We are in open session. The purpose of this memo was to talk specifically about one of the 5 conditions that the board requested be included in a contract with PATH LLC. That condition is laid out in the overview section of your memo, but I'll repeat it here, which is that 60% of all project participants be either eligible or currently enrolled in the medical access program. And as Central Health staff and I have been reviewing this agreement, we have noted that there are a group of people in cohort 1, and I know that's probably a word that I should tell you what it means. Cohort 1 is the first group of participants that will be enrolled into the Pay for Success project. And that cohort will include 24 individuals who are already receiving modified ACT services as part of a pilot project that ECHO is sponsoring with funding from the St. David's Foundation. Those 24 individuals will not meet the eligibility criteria set by the board in terms of Are they eligible or currently enrolled in MAP? So because we were concerned that the inclusion of that group might potentially either be afoul of what the board had asked for or skew the results of the outcomes, because we have people who have been receiving services now for an extended period of time and housing, and we are paying for outcomes. So those participants who have been pilot program participants, presumably we would hope are healthier already than those that are entering. Staff asked social finance to come up with a different way to calculate outcomes for those pilot program participants. It's sort of a complicated calculation, but it is laid out on page 141 of your backup. We're not asking for any sort of action tonight, but we wanted to get your feedback on the inclusion of the pilot program participants and whether you felt the calculation was appropriate given what information you have.
Anything else?
Oh, Mr. Giesland, did you want to talk to this?
No, go ahead. I'm curious as to what the questions are really at this point.
Can I draw those?
Are you through, Holly, with your presentation? You know, one of the questions that I asked of ECHO from their initial presentation 2 years ago is if they could tell us who else was funding them and what were they doing. And we did not get a response to that at the time, okay? At the time, either way, they didn't come back until the following year, which we agreed to fund their request. And to my way of thinking, I don't like double dipping, and you can call it whatever you want, but if somebody is already paying for them to receive services, then I do not believe that those people should be counted in what we are paying for ourselves. And that's so that we can actually, so we don't have to do all this other stuff. We just say, okay, St. David's is paying you for that. They're not going to be included in our population that we are going to be paying you for, and then wanting you to take double credit for doing this however you may want to calculate it. We don't need to calculate it. Real simple and clean. And so that's just my suggestion.
So I'm sure Mike will have more to add to this, but what we did find out is that the pilot program is running out of funding. And so there will not be payers for those 24 people who are currently receiving services unless they are wrapped in to this project.
So, as Holly pointed out, I characterize this as a Samaritan issue. I mean, we happen to be going down this road, and there's 24 people that could potentially lose these important services. And what was originally proposed was to include them, to impute the values of the first cohort. So it's as if they don't have their own baseline, and you take the first cohort through the program and you impute those values, and you say whatever happened to the first cohort, we're going to assume would have happened to the pilot program. So they offered a couple of proposals, and then we kept saying, I can't sign on to that. And finally what they came back with, which I think is a lot more reasonable, is you take 2 consecutive 18-month periods, and you're taking an average of what their outcomes are, and then you're comparing it after they've been in the program for another 18 months beyond that. So it looks more like some of the comparisons. So I think, at this point, is it ideal? No. Is this something that I think somebody else could have stepped up and funded? Yes, but do we toy around with that? Because ultimately, I don't know what's going to happen to those 24 people if there's not another funder source in this, and they're not included in this project.
Madam President?
Thank you. I concur with you, Mr. Giesland. I know this is probably not the ideal situation and not what we agreed initially, but we cannot let go of those 24 individuals. We have to, I know we've committed to 60% of the participants to be eligible or currently in MAP, but given the circumstances, I'm thinking what would happen to these 24 individuals if we didn't step up. So I would encourage us to step up in a way and maybe consider talking with our other parents, seeing if they can help in as well.
And then If I may, I'm sorry, if there's no other questions, I need to
Yes,
address
Julie
the other,
had her hand raised.
the other question. I need to
No,
address.
yes, Julie also had her hand raised.
So I thought before we funded this, and I agree, I don't want any, so two things. First of all, I thought we agreed that we weren't gonna do anything with social finance until several things were met. One was revealing who their funders were, capping the rates of return that they were gonna receive, and some other things. So I'm not aware that we've ever done that, so that it just seems like, why are we even discussing this with them? And then lift that up, and over here, why can't we just take care of them through our services? Why can we not create a resolution here tonight to take care of these? Why does it have to go through social finance, which we know is adding their rate of return, and they're trying to monkey around with all sorts of metrics and calculations that will maximize their return? Why can't we just take care of them? That is what we are supposed to do. Why can we not take care of them?
So, I'll start in, and then I need to come back to Manager Valdez's question as well, but Holly, correct me along the way or add as need be. So they still need to meet those 5 conditions. And we're still negotiating the terms. And the reason why this particular item is being brought back, I just felt like the board needed to know about this pilot program. We're still in the midst of working on terms. I mean, we still don't have an agreement that we can sign at this point.
And they don't have funders, it sounds like.
They've got potential funders. And that's part of the answer to Manager Valdez's question. And I'll talk about that in a second. But we brought this back because we wanted you to know about this pilot program, because it's significant. It's a significant development. There is a provision in here that after a certain amount of time, we, as the government payors, so it would be us, the city and the county, can step up and take possession of this project. I think with respect to this particular pilot, I'm not sure how, mechanically how this would work. If we could, I'm kind of looking at John Morgan as well, but there's some, and Monica, but there's some issues we'd have to work through in terms of funding the ACT, the Assertive Community Teams, for that population of 24, and if they're not mapped, then what do we do? But that's certainly something that we could look into if it's the board's desire. Now, the question is, who are the funders? There are some potential funders. It's my understanding that they still don't have contracts or deals yet with those funders, and so I need to see who it's finally going to be, and then I need to get the correct NDAs in place or whatever we need to have, so that I can come back and answer that question, or they can come back and answer that question, so you can see who all's involved in this. But right now, they still, to my knowledge, they don't have anybody signed up as an impact investor.
They told us that they were going to be leveraging all of these private dollars. It doesn't sound like any have been leveraged. It sounds like St. David's Episcopal has stepped in, but that's not an institutional investor, and that's not somebody who's expecting a return on money. They're just trying to do the right thing, which is what we should be doing. So it bothers me that we were sold that they had these investors, they're going to put in all this money. We were told again and again that we're leveraging our tax dollars. We don't pay for anything unless there are outcomes. Now it sounds like, no, we actually are funding the money, and then we're going to keep paying for it. And so just like, why are we having them involved again, I guess is my question.
We're not funding the money. I think the impact investors are going to pay for the 2 ACT teams. Well, that's the way it's going to work. They'll pay for the 2 ACT teams, including the teams that will work with the pilot cohort. We would still only pay if there's a successful improvement in the outcomes.
The way this is written, it sounds like these people have already been in a pilot. Who's funding that right now?
The St. David's
St.
Foundation.
David's Foundation.
So again, these people are still going to get a return once they start paying in, because St. David's is funding this, and there will be outcomes that are positive, and it's not right that we build in some sort of metric of return to investors who are coming in how many months into this pilot program?
A year later.
Yeah. I have a problem with the funding mechanism, and it's not a good stewardship of our tax dollars to pay a return on people who aren't even invested right now when we could do this. I'm sorry, I just have a problem with the whole way that social finance has set this up. it's problematic, and what we were told, and I remember Councilwoman Ann Kitchen, it's like we're leveraging tax dollars because they paid on day one. Well, it doesn't sound like anybody's paid on day one except a charity, which is great and noble. So let's partner with that charity and do the right thing. Why do we need to add a 9% or whatever that outcome is going to be or return is for them?
We don't. But the board instructed us pursuant to pursuant to a funding allocation that was made to try to go get terms. Now, we still don't have terms yet, so we haven't spent any money. But it's the board's prerogative. If you want to tee this up as another agenda item to do something different or to not do this, that's the board's prerogative.
Andrew does.
I'd like to know exactly who is part of the ACT team. Exactly who is part of the ACT team.
So I have to defer. I don't know if
We can get that information out.
John, if you or Monica, somebody has.
It's relevant to me.
It's a
right now.
multidisciplinary team.
That's right. So I want to know is it an integral care person? Is it a community care person? I want to know if there are enterprise partner members that are actually part of the ACT team that they're wanting to take credit for. So I want to know who are the ACT team members. Because if there are people, our staff, ours, then I would propose, and I'm kind of in agreement with you, Julie, and where you're going with this, I would separate those 24 completely. They're not part of their group then. If St. David's Foundation is not going to renew their investment in these 24 people, then everybody needs to know St. David's Foundation is not going to continue to support these 24 pilot members they've been funding for the past year. And now for us, since they're not going to do it, and we want to be sure that they're not going to do it. I don't know why they're not going to do it, but if they're not going to do it, then okay. You want us to do it? Okay, then we'll do it separate and apart. They are no longer part of what's going to be considered. So that when we get 5 conditions met, and we do participate in the social finance pay for success scheme, these people will not be part of it. This is Central Health now taking responsibility for, look at what Central Health is doing, okay, for 24 homeless people that St. David's Foundation is not going to fund, okay, to accommodate the outcomes that they're wanting to call for. But that's my suggestion, because if that's what we really want to do and doing the right thing, then let's do the right thing, but let's separate the issue, okay? That the social finance contract is one thing, having them come to terms and agreement with 5 conditions that we put on them, that's one thing. These poor people who are not going to get funded by St. David's Foundation will, okay, you drop the ball, people, we want to pick it up because that's the kind of people we are. And then we take credit for it. But they're not going to be included in the skewing of any numbers. And we will take credit for that success.
I just was informed that the president has been impeached.
Okay.
Second, sidebar though is, I want to raise this issue is that I was a supporter of this effort and still am. But if they're not being able to address and meet what we're saying, and it sounds like I don't know what is going on with their financing, but they haven't met that. They're having problems meeting that strategy. Then I would not be opposed to us revisiting that. I know it's down in the future we're anticipating, but it sounds like we're having problems already. And so that's really problematic for me, because I sat here and I heard the council member and speak on behalf, and it just sounds like, and that's been how long ago has that been? About
months. A while.
It's been within the year.
Yeah, it just seems like that the act is not together. So this is problematic for me. So I'm not saying I'm ready to revisit that, but I do think that we need to get an assessment from the staff as to where we are on this and what realistically we can still do given the time frame. Because those funds can be used for other things.
And if I may, I will say that if social finance were here tonight, I'm going to put my social finance hat on for a second, they would tell you that this condition, 60% of all project participants will be met over the course of 5 years. It may not be met in cohort 1. So there may be less MAP members in cohort 1 and more MAP members in cohort 4. So I just want to be really candid about that.
Yeah, I think that's the problematic part, though.
No, it's the 24 members who have been participating for a year that St. David's committed to funding, and now it's not, and so they're left in limbo.
Yeah.
For all fairness, I would actually ask St. David's to speak up and see what the situation is. And we're,
in fairness, it's the Episcopal Health Foundation.
and another thing, and I wanted to go into it with about Episcopal Health. I think Episcopal Health is going to be paying for the health outcomes, correct? The clinical care that's the designation. That's who the clinical care is going to be. Central Health and Episcopal Health. And their payment, their funding is tied somewhat with ours. Because if we're not going to be paying into this model, I don't think they will as well. But I would want, actually not encourage, St. David's to come and speak up to those 24.
Episcopal Health.
No. Are we talking about, we're talking about St. David's or Episcopal Health?
Episcopal Health
sorry.
Foundation.
I said the wrong thing.
So
The pilot program.
is funded currently by the St. David's Foundation.
That's who that's what I'm referring to.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The end payers
Yes,
on this project will include Episcopal
Episcopal
Health, Central Health, and Seton, although they're not entering into a payer contract like
So the
Central.
pilot is St. David's.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Okay.
assuming.
Got it.
Which is what I was saying.
Sorry.
So
what I was saying.
cohort
Yes,
2 is when Episcopal Health will kick in along with
Correct.
us, and they will pay for the clinical services. And their payment is aligned with our payment as well. It's contingent on our payment into this model. And what I would ask us to go back to St. David's and to ask them to get more clarity, and not just to rely on what are they?
Social finance.
The social finance folks. I want to hear it directly from William Buster and see what's this issue with this 24 individuals.
I just want to make sure, just to make it clear that a pilot study is self-limiting on purpose to test to see if something works or doesn't work.
Right.
And then so if of course they're not leaving someone high and dry, they're testing to see if the intervention is effective and feasible and can be brought up. So I just want to make sure that it's clear that there's just 24 people who are with severe mental illness are part of a project that's potentially successful and useful to us and to other people who are trying to help with health, that it seems counterintuitive to just dismiss it because there's a pilot going on of 24. 24 out of how many people?
220
So
something. In the future
10%
total.
So 10% are part of a pilot that is you do it statistically pretty easily to look at nesting or look at subcategories or use it as a control. There's definitely things you can do inside of that. So to be dinged on having maybe a successful pilot happening in this important population seems like something we should take.
That's not it at all. And that wasn't what I was talking about.
I'm just stating how I feel and what I was
Let
hearing.
manager do it and you can talk.
So I just don't want to discount everything just because there's a pilot happening.
Right.
I concur with what you said.
Thank you, Declan. Manager, do it. Manager Valdez.
Yes, and thank you for stating that. And because I wanted to know who is actually a member of the ACT team, and if it is people who are part of our enterprise, and we are providing the services through our funding sources, as we have been doing since our creation in 2004, then, and if there's an issue as to whether or not St. David's Foundation is or is not going to continue funding for these 24, then that's why I suggested, let's take them over. Let's take over this particular project. It is not going to be part of the scheme. We can continue on dealing with after social finance has agreed to the 5 conditions, not a back door for trying to tie us into a contract. Let's make this our project.
Because they don't have their investors yet anyway.
That's right. That's exactly right. And we do want them, we want these 24 people to succeed. But we want them to succeed by, in our terms, for because they're our population, okay? I don't understand how a homeless person who is high, severe mental illness would not be,
May I interrupt you?
would not be one of our population.
Mr. Keys on response.
Well, no, I just wanted to respond whenever she's asked a question.
But I
or
need
made
to,
her
we need to,
statement.
in
Because
interest of time,
I
we
do have an
need to
answer
start wrapping
for-
this up.
Thank you, Mike.
But if you go back to the budget resolutions, it says, and I'm abbreviating, and services funded by Central Health will, to the greatest extent possible, be predicated on the submission of service or business plans that prove viability, sustainability for the intended term and value to Central Health's mission. And so I think if you're wanting to take on this pilot project, and without getting into the complexities related to who's MAP and who's not MAP, we would need to put together a business plan and bring it back if we're going to stick to what is in this budget resolution.
Yeah.
Now, I will say, with all the other access to care work that we have going on, including work that benefits homeless individuals, approximately 10,000, depending on how you want to count the degree of homelessness. This kind of business case, best case is February, but likely March or April, without reshuffling everything and then coming back with this business case. Now, what is essential to this is that we've got to figure out, because what I heard on the call the other day is that the timing of this is on borrowed time, I think, is the sense that I got. But I was listening in via phone. I wasn't there in person for the conversation, but I want to validate what I heard. But the timing is of the essence of this, then I'm not sure about the scope and depth and quality of the business case that we could put together so that you all can make a good decision.
If it's something new, Manager Executive, otherwise, in interest of
No,
time,
it's
we really
really
need to wrap
something-
this up. We have a long agenda.
No, I understand, but if I may, I don't think we have the capacity to take on this project,
Well, it's an informational item only anyway.
but I would ask us to go back and convene with the payers and discuss, especially with St. David's. That's my ask.
Seeing none, this is no motion is necessary. This is an informational item only. Agenda item 8, receive a report of the November 2019 financial statements for Central Health. Ms. Owen.
Good evening. Lisa Owens, Deputy CFO. I have a brief presentation tonight. I did include in your packet last week some information about our priorities in the finance department. It is early in the year right now. We have put 100% of our focus priority on our financial audit, which I'm pleased to say is going very well, with our timeline to have a draft audit to report to you by January 22nd. The team is working really hard also with a lot of the organizational changes. That requires a lot of work on the structural side with your general ledger and accounting systems. So we will have a more full, robust report for you as of the end of the first quarter. As most of you know, early in the year, expenditures are very low. There's nothing that's significantly out of alignment. At this point, our focus is on liquidity and our cash flow. So tonight I'm going to focus on the Central Health balance sheet and a few highlights. Year-to-date through November, we have collected property tax revenue of $9 million compared to $12 million. The timing on this is ultimately based on when taxpayers choose to make their tax payments. We have looked at December. The dollars are still coming in, but as you know, taxes are not technically due until January 31st, but we don't foresee any concerns there. I think it's really just a timing issue. In Central Health, we did make 2 intergovernmental transfers for the DSH program, the Disproportionate Share Program, in October and November, totaling $7.3 million. And with the changes in our budget and bringing some significant healthcare contracts and healthcare staff into the Central Health budget this year, we are expecting approximately $24 million year-to-date for healthcare delivery, and we're looking at about a $10 to $12 million spend per month, which is very different than last year in our healthcare delivery. And again, we'll have more details for you about where those expenses are in primary care, specialty care, as those contracts are being executed and services are continuing to be delivered seamlessly. We did have net assets decrease between the beginning of the fiscal year to today. That is a normal cash flow that we see at this time of year. in the summer and towards the end of our fiscal year and going into October, November, there's very little tax collection. So we had higher expenses with the changes in our organizational structure, as well as little less revenue. We did have lease revenue, traditional lease revenue that we've had, as well as interest income, which continues to be very positive. And just an update for the Travis County Healthcare District LPPF. We did make an IGT for the URIP program of $19 million in November. And you'll see on the balance sheet, the balance in that restricted account is just over $2 million. So looking through the balance sheet, I'll just hit some highlights. Our total current assets are up about $40 million year over year. That is predominantly due to two things. Again, looking at liquidity and cash, we are starting the year in a stronger cash position. You should see most of our dollars are held in short-term investments through our investment portfolio, and you'll see that we're starting the year about $21 million over last year. And then we do record all of the taxes receivable when they're levied, and those were, again, over about $214 million this year. And so those taxes receivable are significantly higher, and that makes up the other difference in our total current assets. No major changes. Year over year, you'll see a difference in the restricted cash and non-current assets. That is predominantly going to be, at this time last year, we had not made a $20 million contribution to the Sendero surplus debenture, and then that $2 million held restricted for the LPPF, as that is a new fiduciary role this fiscal, towards the end of last year and this fiscal year. So total assets are at $540 million, and last year at this time we're at about $482 million. Looking at our liabilities, you'll see our current liabilities are significantly higher than last year, again, driven by two main things. You'll see that our accounts payable is about $13 million higher than last year. As I mentioned, about $24 million in 2 months of healthcare spend. That's about $12 million a month. So we do have a significantly higher spend as we are paying the provider contracts that we are now contracted through Central Health. It is about $10 to $12 million per month, and that makes up the majority of that difference. And then also just the deferred tax revenue. So the liability, the tax receivable is recorded, and then as that is collected, the deferred tax revenue is relieved. So again, because we have a higher assessed value this year and a budgeted increase in our tax revenue, that amount is higher. So total current liabilities are at $227.6 million. Our restricted and non-current liabilities are at $9.9 million. Again, the only significant change there being the funds that are held for the LPPF, which is the offset, the $2 million. And then a total liabilities of $237.6 million. Our net assets are at $302.7 million for total liabilities and net assets of $540 million. As I said, we will have our first quarter reporting for you in January with detail in the healthcare delivery expenditures in the primary care and specialty care areas, similar to we've seen in the past. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Andrew, all those?
With respect to the liabilities under accounts payable, and you said that they were due to the increase in contractor spend, are those for the new initiatives that we were?
No, it's really for the primary care contracts and the specialty care contracts that are now being held in Central Health.
Yes. That was brought in from what, CCC?
Those were formerly budgeted in the CCC.
Okay.
And contracted in the CCC.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. That's an informational item. No motion is necessary.
And then on the, we're taking up the CCC?
Agenda item 9, receiver report of November 2019 Financial Services for Community Care Collaborative. Ms. Owens.
We did not have a report available, but we will be sending it out. We will be putting it on our website and sharing it with you as soon as it's available. Again, with all the changes and our focus on the financial audit, we will get that to you as soon as possible. Very similar in the form of a balance sheet with some highlights.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Agenda item 15, take action to appoint an acting or interim compliance officer. Mr. Giesman.
Yes, thank you. So board members, you all know Monica Crowley, who is here in the audience with us this evening. Thank you. Monica has agreed, and I really want to thank her publicly for stepping up and allowing me to put her name forward as the acting compliance officer. This will be an interim appointment. After the first of the year, there's a number of personnel onboardings that we need to embark on, and compliance officer being one of them. And so in the meantime, though, we need to have a compliance officer. There's a lot of things that we need to deal with. It's part of who we are as a culture and our integrity. But also in the onboarding, in the selection and the onboarding of that individual. If you look at her resume, she brings a wealth of experience in various regulatory and compliance roles to us, in addition to having a law degree, obviously. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, hear a motion first.
I move that the board appoint Monica Crowley as the interim compliance officer for Central Health, and I further move that Ms. Crowley be authorized to enter into or utilize existing contracts that will assist her in performing the duties of compliance officer, including contracts with legal counsel.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Manager Oliver, seconded by Manager Greenberg. Any discussion? Manager Jones.
Help me understand, this is my first vote on an appointment of this nature. So is this person reporting directly to you, Mike?
Yes, but there's also a direct line of communication to the board. So if there's a compliance issue similar to what Patty had that needs to be escalated to the board, you can bypass the CEO and go straight to the board.
So they can bypass the CEO? Okay, all right, then. That's helpful. Thanks very much. I was worried about.
Manager Waldez.
No, I wanted to just congratulate, thank you, Monica. But I also would like to know that in the scale that Manager Jones had previously brought up with respect to 36 to 42, where is her position there?
I'm not advised at this point, and I apologize for not knowing that. But we are going to be addressing all job description and related changes as well.
I appreciate that, and just to make a suggestion, and I apologize to Holly in advance, in the future, whenever we have these kinds of vacancies to fill, if we can kind of know where they fit in our request for information, so we can be better aware of our diversity from the top down. Okay.
Any further questions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All against? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Okay, we did agenda item 3 already. Agenda item 11, discuss and take appropriate action on update regarding Sendero Health Plans, Inc., including the effect of federal legislative and regulatory actions. Ms. McDonald is available to answer questions on the memo provided in the backup for this item.
So,
Thanks, Abby. Manager Greenberg, did you have a question?
yes, I do have some questions about the content of the memo and the number of the risk score of the people that are being brought on, risk scores.
Okay.
So depending on how we answer that question, I would advise that we probably talk about that in a closed session.
We'll go to into next.
Okay, so we'll address that in closed session?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Stephanie? None? Okay. So then we'll move on to,
So just go ahead, if you would, and read the announcement for the board is convening in closed session, which is right underneath here.
okay. I announce that the board is convening in closed session to discuss agenda item 11 under section 551.085 of the Texas Government Code, governing board of certain providers of healthcare services. In addition to our Travis County Council and Mr. Yurkowski and his staff in Sendero, the following Central Health staff may remain for closed session: Mr. Giesland, Ms. Cavazos, Mr. Knodel, Ms. Owens, and Ms. McDonald. Good. Today is December 18, 2019. It is 8:16. We're coming out of closed session of agenda item 11. No action is necessary. Next item is agenda item 10. Discuss and take appropriate action on the request by Sendero Health Plans, Inc. to modify amended and restated debenture number 1 issued by Sendero to Central Health December 31st, 2015. Wes, Jeff?
Thanks. I'll kick off. And there was a letter in the packet, a brief letter that went out last week. And I think the presentation just got handed out. So we'll just do a little more in-depth presentation. We are requesting action tonight on this item. It's related to amending the terms on a surplus debenture. And, just to kind of take a couple steps back, you don't hear that word a whole lot, so what the heck is it? And I've got a definition there. It's just a debt instrument that's accounted for as equity under insurance statutory accounting rules. So basically a couple of the capital payments that were made from Central Health to Sendero are actually what we call the surplus debenture. The debenture that we're requesting action on to amend is an amended surplus debenture that was issued in December of 2015. And the amount of the debenture is a little over $17 million. And no one probably remembers, which is fine. But the amended debenture that we're talking about was actually two debentures that were combined. We had issued an initial debenture for $8 million, and then we reissued this debenture and added an amount to it and accrued some interest. So hence the total little over $17 million, $17,083,000. The interest rate on the debenture is 1%. There's a term or the way a surplus debenture works. There's a trigger item that triggers repayment of the debenture, and repayment would both be related to interest and principal. The surplus floor that triggers the repayment on this debenture, which is the same on the other, is $1.5 million of issuer surplus, or 375% of risk-based capital. So in other words, 375% or greater. So the terms of the agreement also set the date of evaluation of the financial condition at December 1st of each year. And so we've we've looked as of December 1st, and the risk-based capital level, the 375%, has been exceeded. And again, just as a reminder, there was an additional $20 million debenture that was issued in September 2018, but that's subordinate to this initial debenture. So, in other words, this initial debenture would have to be fully paid in order to trigger the second debenture. So again, we're requesting action on just the initial amended debenture. So I may have stole a little bit of the thunder here on the next slide, but again, the status as of December 1st, 2019 is Sendero has exceeded the risk-based capital floor level, which by that trigger requires payments upon meeting or exceeding that surplus floor. So what exactly does that mean? The first priority of the instrument is triggering the interest amount, and so the calculated amount of interest from issue date to December 1 is approximately $653,000. And so the way that actually works is You trigger the RBC level to 375%, and then you look if the payment if the interest payment was made, is the level still above 375%? And if that's the case, then in a nutshell, you have 45 days to make payment, and that would be a payment from Sendero to Central Health. And then the second priority, once that priority is fulfilled, the second priority is the principal repayment. And the principal repayment is measured or accrued at 1/30th. Again, it's a 30-year note, so 1/30th for each outstanding year. And then the same process occurs, which is you measure, obviously you've triggered the RBC level, so you look at the RBC level prior to payment and then subsequent to payment. And if the capital level or the RBC level is still above 375%, then that amount becomes due with one caveat, and the caveat is that the Sendero board authorizes the payment. So that's the difference between the interest payment or the first priority and the second priority, which is the principal payment, which is the Sendero board is required to authorize the payment. So a couple of considerations and why we're here tonight to request amendment. Again, this is a good problem to have. I mean, I think, trying to remember back in 2015, I think 375% of RBC seemed like a fairly substantial level. But at the time, so we've achieved those levels, but at the time we were in 2 insurance lines, 2 product lines. Today, rather than being in 2, we're in 1, and we've talked a little bit about some of the cash flow challenges related to both, and you see on the second bullet point, the high-risk CHAP patients that we've moved over. And in addition to that, the actual mechanics of the risk adjustment payment and how that occurs subsequent to the end of the calendar year plus approximately 8 months. We mentioned in the previous item that we've more than doubled the size of our high-risk CHAP members in 2020. We're still working on the final effectuated number of total membership for Sendero in the ACA. And then last is more of an accounting element, which is if the surplus floor conditions are met, there's a requirement to book the liability at year end. So Sendero's year end would be December 31st of this year. So that's hence why we're coming to you this evening to request an amendment of that debenture. So the recommendation that staff is making and that we requested in the memo, I think there's one slight addition, but that we increase the surplus floor to 500% of risk-based capital, and we look at that over a rolling 3-year average. So in other words, any volatility that may occur on the levels, the rolling 3-year average would help smooth that out and ensure financial stability as those payments were made. And then we also are requesting to revise the evaluation date from December 1st to move it up a little bit. It's a little rushed, and December 1st is not a kind of typical end of the quarter, so we're requesting that we revise the financial evaluation of the risk-based capital evaluation date from December 1st of every year to September 30th. And I've just listed a couple of advantages or reasons why we're asking to increase the risk-based capital floor, including just having enough capital for any substantial increase in ACA enrollment from one year to the next. We don't know what enrollment will be from year to year, but just that we have the capital to accommodate any volatility that we may have in either membership and or cost. And again, since we're only in one line of business, and we're putting some high-risk patients in our patient population, again, there's a up to 20-month lag as it relates to the risk adjustment payment. And we think the 3-year rolling average, again, will help smooth some of that out. So I'm going to pause there. And Wes, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add, but we'll certainly be happy to answer any questions.
Maybe only at the high level. The debenture is a pretty nice vehicle to allow Sendero the opportunity someday to give back to Central Health. I assume normally when you make a disbursement, especially to a 501c3, those funds stay in the 501c3. They're not supposed to come back out. And but with the debenture, because of the business we're in, there is this mechanism in place which protects the $37 million. So the terms that this change we're asking for does not change that at all. Like there's still, whatever it is, 5-10 years down the road, if it makes sense, then there's an opportunity to transfer funds back. The change we're asking for is, as it says on the interest and principal, where it protects our working capital, leaves us in a stronger position. And so that's why we're asking for that today. And when it was set up, I don't believe Central Health factored these kind of payments into the project. We weren't really building repayments into our business plans, and I'm not sure you were expecting.
Okay, motion.
So, I'm so sorry, but given that you have a new condition on what you're asking to be changed, the motion will be revised slightly to accommodate both of the conditions that Jeff talked about. I can read it for you if you'd like, Cynthia, and we'll just reflect that Cynthia made the motion and then second it. And if I get it wrong, just call me out. Okay, so I move that the board approve the amendment of the amended and restated debenture number 1, issued by Sendero Health Plans, Inc. to Central Health, 12/31/2015, to raise the surplus floor in paragraph 1.4, subsection 2, from 375% to 500% of risk-based capital over a rolling 3-year average, and to modify the payment calculation date to September 30th of each year.
I have a second.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have Manager Valdez made the motion, seconded by Manager Zuniga. Any questions? Any questions? None?
Nope.
Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Now, before we get off this agenda, is there anything you need signed for regulatory purposes with respect to this motion?
So briefly, the next step is it goes to TDI for approval first, and then once that's signed, then we can execute.
Thank you.
That's Jeff. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one quick question, real fast. I apologize. Since normally we have Dr. Bell, who makes a little comment, and he's not here, and our condolences go out to him. Wes, I'm assuming you do have the complete support of your board on this request, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Jen, what's that? Did you say something?
No, everything's fine.
Okay. Agenda item 12, discuss and take appropriate action on healthcare services delivery expansion to Eastern Travis County, including project timelines. Stephanie.
Actually, members, I'll speak. You have several memo in your packets, and I'm going to just touch on 2 items tonight and touch on Southeast Travis County first, just briefly, and then spend the bulk of the time on discussing Colony Park. It's my understanding that you were approached by Travis County Fire and Rescue, UT School of Nursing, and then subsequent to Commissioner Gomez, and subsequent to that meeting, they had sent in another proposal, Travis County Fire and Rescue, and so you've got that, and along with UT School of Nursing, in your packet this evening. And we still need to put a business case around this. We've got to analyze it and figure out, does it make sense for us to do this? As you know, we've implemented some new business processes, late summer, early fall, and we need to run this through it. And so we hope to be able to bring back a recommendation to you in January. I know with some of tonight's homework assignments, we may need to shuffle that date around a little bit, but we'll do our best to bring something back to you in January. In the meantime, to the greatest extent possible, we'll continue to look for other property options out in southeast Travis County. And you'll get a brief update on what we know so far, because ultimately you have community care, which is needing to expand. They're in the Travis County Employees Clinic. So with that, I'll move on to Colony Park, and then I think there's some discussion to be had around some of the real estate in southeast Travis County, we'll need to do that in closed session, so we can go into closed session. You can hear about what we know in southeast Travis County, or we can move on to Colony Park. It's your choice.
My only comment was I met with Chief Bailey and Commissioner Gomez and Dr. Morgan and staff there at the facility, and they want to get this done. And as you've heard me say this over and over again, it's about patience. Staff will bring this back to us. Thank you, Mike. All right.
Did you want, before we talk about Colony Park, did you want we'll have to go into closed session because it involves real estate acquisition, but did you want to hear from Mr. Lamp on southeast Travis County, or go to Colony Park and then hear from Mr. Lamp?
We can hear from Stephen.
We'll need to go into closed session because it involves potential real estate acquisition.
All right, so let me
Go into closed session?
Well, I'm asking, what is the board's preference? Do you want to just keep talking about Colony Park? I'm sorry, I'm confusing agenda items. My apologies.
All right.
So on Colony Park, we're still moving forward. And as you'll recall, we mentioned this earlier tonight, but this goes back to work that has been underway for some time, but I think began in earnest in 2017 when the board said, we want to prioritize, 2018, we want to prioritize this area as one of our 4 priority areas, and it remains a priority as put forth in the budget resolution. There's a 2-pronged approach here, a short-term or a bridge until, and I give Ashton Cumberbatch credit for coming up with that phrase, a bridge until there is a longer-term solution. Now, the longer-term solution has a lot of moving parts to it, and I'll discuss that in a minute. But the short term involved 2 things that we said we would do, and we are continuing to do, and it's things that we do well. One is that we pay for people's health care through the MAP and MAP Basic. Patients are being seen not only in the mobile clinic, but in other community care clinics and the People's Clinic. From that zip code, we estimate that's probably in the neighborhood of in excess of 3,000 and 78724. So we're paying for people's health care right now, today. Second is we have enrollment eligibility in the neighborhood weekly. And that's something we can do rather well. We don't have to do it at enrollment eligibility offices, but we can stage somebody remotely, and we do that in our homeless resource clinics. We're doing this now in Colony Park, and so we're doing that. There's a third thing that we haven't done before, but we're doing now, and that's where we purchased a mobile clinic. And it's at 2 locations weekly, and for a total of 3 days for the week. So there's a third thing that we're doing, and those are commitments that we've made. There's a fourth commitment that we've made where I think, we tried an idea, but we need to tighten up our business planning around it, quite frankly. I'm going to use that phrase to capture a lot of activity that's going on behind the scenes, but that fourth area is on resource provision. So not clinics, I think non-clinical. And it involves enrollment eligibility, but we have an eligibility resource, we have a resource center at Overton Elementary, and Right now, it's occupied and used by our eligibility team, our person that goes out there. At one point, the city and the county had resources out there, but they withdrew their resources because they just weren't getting the traffic that they needed. I've had a couple of conversations with Stephanie Hayden and Sherry Fleming to kind of get a sense about, you know, what, not an in-depth analysis, but to understand what happened. And so that fourth thing that we're trying to do, which is to host and manage and pull together programs for a resource center. Okay, we tried something for a little while, but now we need to try something different. And that's a commitment that's been made to the community, and we're going to follow through on that. Let me spend a little bit of time talking about that resource operation. There are some things, for example, I know that Melissa Cepeda has been able to line up a farm share program that takes place there at the elementary school. So it's, excuse me, at the elementary school? Okay. So it's along the lines of what you see out there at the Southeast Health and Wellness Center. They're providing farm share. Now,
When you say farm share, you mean food?
Market.
yes, food, yes.
Yeah.
Food.
Yeah, food.
Yeah, so,
Farmers
so I
market.
want the public
Yes,
to
ma'am.
understand.
Yeah,
Can you
thank
explain for the public who's listening what you mean by
Right.
farm share?
Farm shares, yes. It's a way to address a social determinant, which
Food
health, which is
insecurity.
food and food insecurity. So,
Okay.
Healthy food for an affordable price.
now I think long-term with the resource operation that we have out there, the fourth offering that we have, the fourth thing that we're trying to do, is building up to the larger presence in Colony Park. So it's a flip in the sense that we're not building X thousands of square foot of clinic space and then putting in a resource center. We're putting in resource programs first, leading up to something in the community master plan. So it's something new for us, but we're trying it. As part of that resource work, a commitment was made to the community that we would hire somebody. And after some discussions with Ms. Scott, we had actually reposted that position because when we looked at the team that we can bring, not just one person, but the team of people at Central Health that we could bring and running us through our business processes, we realized we had a specific skill set that we needed to backfill. But I think after talking to Mrs. Scott, she said, you know, we were promised somebody at the program manager level. Okay, I understand that, and I'll honor that promise. So we're going to go back. We'll have to repost. And so I don't want to say to this board or to the community, and this is the conversation that Mrs. Scott and I have been have tomorrow, is hiring somebody isn't a plan. That's one step in a much larger plan. And what I've proposed to her is just a general timeline. I mean, nothing set in stone, it's got draft on it, but I want to go to the community in a shared decision-making model and really build out some business plans around this resource center that we're successful. We've tried the idea approach. Let's take what we've learned, let's build on it, and let's put together a plan that works for the community. That's where we're headed with this fourth item, the resource center and the affiliated programs. Now, the physical space of the resource center remains to be seen. We've had some conversations with AISD about potentially moving it from Overton to Barbara Jordan Elementary. That has its challenges. AISD has indicated, you know, could you look at other places because we're space, or the school district feels that they're strapped for space at that particular campus. And I can't force AISD to take something, but I'm not done exploring the opportunities at Barbara Jordan Elementary either, because it is in a good location. Because of its placement on the streets. But we'll have to get real creative about the resource center. There is a temporary solution until something more permanent is built. So again, with the resource center, there's the programmatic aspect of it as it leads up to the larger health and wellness center. And then there's the physical, short-term physical space issue. Staff has already looked into certain mobile solutions, and hopefully we could partner with the city and or the county, and you could share space. It didn't have to be 7 days a week. It could be, you know, you're here 2 days a week, we're here 2 days a week or whatever. But even bringing in other nonprofits that the community feels like would meet their needs. So that's a little bit more involved process, but again, I don't just want to keep throwing ideas out there and not having any kind of plan around it. I want to have something that works for the community, has some sustainability, and leads us into the long-term health and wellness center with, as Scott puts it, building the trust with the community. So that's where we are right now at Colony Park. Now I want to talk briefly about the longer-term solution. As I said, that's a moving target because we're, Stephen is working with the city and the master developer, and to some extent you're beholden to somebody else's economics on that deal. But I think trying to understand, okay, what space do we really need, and circling back around with community care on their reset work that they've recently done. I've been out ill for the past couple of days, so I haven't had a chance to circle back around with Jason on that, but I intend to soon. But understanding, what it is that they foresee in the long term in the future, so we know what to build for. Just to put it simply, perhaps not technically correct, but that and working with Catellus in the city to bring all this together. So again, there's a lot of moving parts to that. You'll see some action at the city council next month in January, hopefully, around a cost sharing agreement. It's supposed to come up this month, but we needed some more time to look over what their legal counsel sent to us from the city. And that's an interlocal agreement that will require approval of both bodies, meaning the city council as well as this body as well. So we're going to continue to make strides on that longer term solution, and again, be engaged with the community every step of the way. But I want to be upfront about the complexities around that, and what we're working daily to try to overcome.
Any questions? Manager Jones?
Just a couple of comments. One is that I do think that certainly a lot of work has been done in pulling together the community around Colony Park to address the issues that are faced out there. I think a lot of it has been done by grunt grassroots work by the leadership of the department under Larry Wallace's leadership. I think that part of it is building that trust in the community. And so as you talk about these new things or these ongoing things that you're wanting to do, my concern is a couple of things. One is that you need to have leadership out there on the ground now. Because the community, these communities particularly, are accustomed to a lot of talk. We're going to do this. We have strategies. We want to develop an interim plan. 78724, which Colony Park sits in, has some of the highest mortality rates in this community, in this county. And so the urgency is now. And I appreciate some of the strategies. I think the mobile van, the mobile van use, as well as the modular unit that you're talking about. The mobile van between the two campuses is a good idea. The challenge is getting the people who have historically worked with this collaboration to build back into it now, because rest assured, there are many people in the community who are not trusting us right now. And so hopefully you can build that trust back again. I'll just be honest with you on that. The strategy of collaborating with others, I think, is what the Eastern Crescent was about. We brought together all of these folks who were talking about what are we going to do in not only Colony Park, but the whole Eastern Crescent. A strategy you mentioned was this interim of having the mobile, the food distribution program. They also were involved in bringing the banking out there, working with Texas Capital. They was also involved in doing some temporary arrangements. All of this is good. But the question is, we've done this sporadically over the last 3 years out there. The question is that we've worked with the city to get a land. But the citizens, babies have been born almost 5 years old now, and the community haven't seen anything really in terms of physical investment and structure. So my only concern is, one, is that you get leadership out there so people can have faith and trust in us, because for the next several months, I'm sure it's going to be quite unsettling, to say the least. Secondly is, while you're working with other groups to bring these interim plans in, that's good, but let the community know that it's long-term we're investing and not just these temporary, because that's what they're accustomed to seeing and hearing. And then thirdly, that we make the commitment that we put some timelines on these that we share with the community. That we don't just say, yeah, we're gonna get to it, we're gonna do it within 3 years, we're gonna do it within 6 months, so that they can have something to measure us against. Because what they have heard many years, way before you even got here, but others have said, we're gonna do something out here, and we haven't done anything, and they keep hearing it. So that's the frustration that I speak on, I think on part of the community they've had. Yes, they've seen some things, but they've heard some of this before. And they're frustrated, and then they have a whole advocate for it, and they feel that this person has been snatched out from behind them, so they have no one to trust. They don't see anyone out there now, so they have to come over here and make statements like they made tonight. That's frustrating to them. And as a board member, as a citizen of this community, which is reflective of their frustration and who've lived some of their life experiences, I understand that.
I respond, Mr. Chair. So we're going to continue to do the things that we said we would do that we are currently doing, which I count amongst the real. Granted, they're bridges. They're temporary. And that's the mobile clinic. That's the eligibility enrollment. That's the work around the resources. I mean, we're the one partner that's still out there weekly, signing people up. And I think and I'm happy to share this with you. The reason I didn't share it with the board tonight is that I wanted the chance for, and Mrs. Scott's been busy with the recent holiday party. She's had a lot of things going on, but I wanted her to look at this plan around taking the lessons learned from the Resource Center, put a business plan around it. It does have timelines to it. But I needed to get a sense from her because I rely on her for her insight on this. But I told her, I said, in January, I'd like to bring this back to the board so they understand this resource work that we're doing. It's unlike anything that we've done anywhere else. The closest we come to it is Southeast Health and Wellness. But again, that was with a big established building out there that we added a resource center to. It's a little bit different, but I want to make sure you all are bought in on this. And so there are timelines attached to that. Now, one question I have for you is, who was at the last advisory committee meeting in terms of leadership?
What did you mean, Colony Park?
Yes, sir.
I was there. I don't know. You were there, and a few others.
That's right. Both of us were there.
Mr.
And what I hope, Manager Jones, is that you and I both can continue to go to these events and be that leadership on the ground. You representing the board, and to the extent that if, for whatever reason, I'm pressed into service in other locations, we've got people that I would call activators that are leaders within this organization that can be there in my place, or be there alongside us. And so I totally agree with you. Leadership should continue to be going out there and physically have a presence. And I think when we bring somebody on at this managerial level and set forth the expectations about what they're going to be doing in this great neighborhood, it'll have that not weekly or bi-weekly or monthly presence, but that day-to-day presence. And so we'll be able to address that.
Well, I hope so.
On both fronts.
I think that's what it was going to take. Someone that the community buys into, is comfortable with, and who they can relate to. You and I are there sporadically. They want someone there who's on the ground all of the time. I think such a position would do that. But once again, I say this historical knowledge. We've got to make sure that we get someone there as soon as possible.
Understood. And that's what we're working on. And lastly, if I can, my last response to your comments, you know, I had a discussion about Mr. Wallace's leaving and what that meant for the community. And I don't know if you recall what I said, but I understand I can't be him out of the community. And I understand that there is going to be a great deal of mistrust, frustration, potentially name-calling, ridicule, intense scrutiny, and criticism, the likes of which I have probably never known. But I'm going to take every bit of it because I think that's part of the process of healing and moving forward. And that's all I have to say on that. The rest of it's going to be backed up by action.
I think that was the community is waiting to see.
Understood.
Manager Valdez?
I'd like to know, Mike, if you're finished with your report
Yes, ma'am.
for the whole Eastern Crescent or
Well,
just for Colony Park?
Just for those two items that I wanted to bring to your attention. There's other memos in the packet. We can certainly answer any questions.
Manager Valdez?
No, so just have a request whenever you're giving us, you know, like you asked just right now, and appropriately so, who is present at the community meetings? And it's important that we all know who's present at the community meetings in all the neighborhoods, and each of the targeted groups, neighborhoods, because they are the people who live in that neighborhood. And so if we can get a feel for like the numbers, you know, and staff is one thing, okay? Staff and Central Health or Community Care Enterprise Membership is one thing, but actual people who live in that neighborhood is another. And so I'd like to actually know if, you know, about how many people were there and how many people were not necessarily Central Health associated, but rather how many people were from the community that were present. And the reason I ask that is because what I'd like to know if with the work of Central Health's boots on the ground strategies, are we seeing an increase in the level of participation from those neighborhoods? And if so, how? Because that's something that can be tied specifically to strategies that you have put in place with the other departments, such as community outreach, civic engagement, et cetera, that we also need to take into account when we assess the success or not of that particular strategy.
Understood. And keep in mind, I need to say, you know, you said the strategies that you were putting on the ground. These are things that were in motion before I got here. I'm just continuing the work that other people had started, to be fair.
Well, what I'm specifically referring to is like when we put specifically in place that for the first time the community civic engagement and community outreach, okay, that's now been absorbed. But those things were efforts that Central Health put in place specifically to address boots on the ground
all of the outreach
resources.
We have had some success. We've been able to get some new people there, and I would like to attribute it to the community healthcare worker pilot work. I mean, that was one of their charges, was to get people more engaged in some of the advisory committee meetings. And I know there were some new faces at Southeast Travis County and at Colony Park.
And so the numbers that
at Austin Colony Hornsby Bend
asking
too,
about, we have that, so we can provide you with the meeting attendance. But I would like to report, since we had our community health workers on the ground, specifically that for our advisory committees, our goal was to increase resident participation.
Right.
Because previously we had a lot of partners at the table, but not as many residents.
That's right.
And so since October, our goal was to increase the number of residents per meeting by 3 to 5 people. And we've actually increased it by 5 to 8 residents since September. So I think that's progress, almost doubling the number of residents that are participating in these advisory committee meetings. And I do want to mention that the community health worker pilot is a pilot. It's been up and running since August, and our goal in 2020 is to bring these community health workers on staff, so they'll be paid Central Health staff members, and the goal is to bring 4 of them on during the
coming year
2020. And so in Colony Park, we do currently have the equivalent of 1 full-time community health worker on the ground that is helping us with programming, so our Way to Wellness programming that we hope to host at the Northeast Resource Center, but also helping drive people to eligibility and enrollment and promote the services that we already have in the area, for example, the mobile clinic.
Wester?
I just had a quick question. The community health worker that's in Colony Park, that individual is full-time in Colony Park?
So there's 2 individuals that are working in the Colony Park area,
and are they
combining to make 1 full-time employee,
they make
40 hours.
1 FTE.
Correct.
No part-timers making 1 full-time equivalent. And are they from the neighborhood or representative of the
One lives in the
neighborhood?
Runberg area, one lives, I believe, and I might be wrong, but I believe in the Hornsby Bend area. I'm not 100% sure, but they have both been on the ground. They've literally knocked on doors. There is a convenience store there by Barbara Jordan. They have camped out at that convenience store, passing out information, promoting the mobile clinic. I think, Mr. Jones, you've met them because they've attended our advisory committee meetings.
And that's not to take, excuse me, that's not to take away from your concerns, okay?
No.
What I'm just saying is that we want to present a, you know, for me, the big picture in each area and the effect and the effective change that is occurring as a result of quantifiably by what strategy. And so that's something that we can look at so that you can address within your staff as to what is successful and what is not. This is why we have to change things in order to accommodate a greater success and make sure that we incorporate what the community in each individual community believes is necessary to improve our relationship with them. So I just wanted to make sure that we take that also into consideration as you make these reports.
I think we're saying the same thing. I just want to emphasize that in some communities, there needs to be visible, on the ground, day-to-day
I agree.
leadership.
We are in agreement.
And the question is, that has been somewhat removed. And so in the absence of that, there is a need to be able to have someone that the community that was here tonight can talk to and say, yes, there are Central Health representatives. Not Shannon Jones, not Mike Giesland, not even Larry Wallace.
That's right.
But they need to have someone who's do that. Under the leadership that Larry had provided, they had a Spock who was working with the community, who were doing some things in partnership. That is gone. So now it's call Mike, call Shannon, call Barbara, call whomever. And that's all I'm saying, is that leadership needs to be replaced there. I'm happy to hear that you're saying you're a manager. I think that would be a great opportunity. But I would hope and encourage you to consider someone who is not only reflective, but who's culturally connected with the community, not insert someone in to lead them. So keep that in mind.
And you're saying, you know, I've had conversations with other leaders in the community out there, in the neighborhoods, and that was something that was first and foremost on our minds anyway, and so they validated it by saying exactly what you've just said. And what that does is I feel like that gives us, you know, direction, thank you, on making certain that in the interview process that it's not just here. This is your assigned region, similar to what a big corporation does. It's got global reach. It's you need to be part of this community in a real way. Understood, thank you.
Okay.
And that's why, and I completely concur with everything that Manager Jones has said, that I did not mean when I asked about the outreach, the community health workers, that would be a replacement. I just wanted to make sure that they were culturally part of the community and had that cultural competency to be in that role. I completely 5,000% concur that we need that full-time person who you have referenced in the future as soon as possible. And my question for Mr. Giesland, I think he started to answer it, is, has that position been posted? Are we interviewing for a person who would serve as Manager Jones has so competently and forcefully suggested? And do we have a timeline when we hope to bring that person on board?
So we have paused what was the second posting after I learned that a promise had been made for a particular type of position.
Okay.
We're still going to take the team approach. Let me just be real clear about that. Hiring this one person is not the panacea to it all, okay? We're going to have anywhere from 6 to 8 people working on Colony Park at any given time, all right? Okay. But
and or the other areas. I would
after my conversation with Ms. Scott, there's some, in talking with members of the executive team, there's some things that I wanted to change about that job description, but bringing on somebody that's at the manager level that is what I call an activator, meaning they don't have to go through a whole chain to say, hey, we need to go do this out there. They can escalate that in a hurry. But also, they had,
so they have authority.
There's some things from the prior job description that we need to import and export out of the second one.
Okay.
but that's on my desk right now.
So do you have a timeline for that?
Um,
I know you have a lot on your desk, just curious if there's
I
some
mean,
kind
ideally,
of timeline you have in
it's
mind.
to be aggressive about it. The posting needs to be up to get the right pool of candidates. I'm gonna say at least 2, but maybe longer. I want to get a good pool of candidates in. We need to leave it up until we get that pool of candidates in. But the onboarding process, if they're leaving a current position, best case scenario could be February. But if they've got to give
A couple
a
weeks
little bit
notice.
extra notice, then it could easily be March.
Mike, one final note too is I want to remind our board that Jana Allen is our program manager, and she is our point person for our advisory committees, and she's also the point person for Colony Park and the Colony Park Advisory Committee. And so she's not officed in Colony Park full-time, but that is her full-time focus, is managing our 4 advisory committees in our priority areas with support from our entire community engagement team. So I didn't want to
Yeah, we appreciate the
forget
work.
that
Thank
part.
you for mentioning that.
So we're saying, because you just said something a little troubling, is that, so you're saying it is conceivable that the community could continue to go with the outreach workers and others without that manager position in place until March?
No, sir. We currently have teams of people. We have a team of people working on Colony Park. We're going to continue to do the outreach, the eligibility, and everything else that we're doing.
Right.
But having somebody at a manager level that is helping us reboot the resource programs with those other partners. Keep in mind, we're out there right now. It's the other partners that we have to work to bring to the table. So having a manager that can assist with that work, it depends on their job situation. If they're able to switch jobs quickly, then we could have them on board early February. If they can't, then I want to be realistic about it and say that it's March. The other piece about this onboarding process is similar to the community conversation that I had when I was hired. These individuals, or the individual, before they're brought on officially, there needs to be a visit with folks in Colony Park. Whether that's a core group or an advisory committee, there's different ways we can do
Or
that.
town hall, or open meeting. Call to the community.
That's a world that I'm used to, and I think the right candidate would be wise to have that introduction as well.
Okay, I mean, this is an administrative function hiring, I realize it, but I just, in that interim, in the next 3 months, if we have issues that flare up, and we don't have a pinpoint person who can sort of help come and talk with us, I don't want us to say, how did we get here? Because I do think that where you're talking about this person will coordinate functions. As a director of a major department, I also know that that person plays a critical role in working with who you already have out there now and making sure that what they're doing now is part of the bigger picture. And delaying that a quarter to hire someone to do that can be problematic.
Understood. And that's why it's not the same as having somebody out there day to day, but taking a team approach, and with me checking in with Mrs. Scott at a minimum weekly.
And Mike, maybe it would be helpful, we could share the model that you asked us to create for Colony Park and other communities in Eastern Travis County, but with our team approach, but also the 2 external relation managers, which in this case is you and Jana, as we're going through this hiring process. Would that be helpful?
I think if we could put together a memo for the board and distribute it.
Okay, and we also have a diagram that shows it as well.
Yeah.
That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, let's move on to agenda item 13. Discuss Central Health owned or occupied real property and potential property for acquisition or lease. Stephen?
It's closed session. We have to go into closed session.
Is he going to present?
This is the agenda item.
We have to go into closed session.
Is this going to, Colin, is this going to
Close.
put it first, or?
Stephen, do you have anything in open or all enclosed today?
Probably all enclosed.
Okay. All right. I announce that the board is convening in closed session to discuss.
Council, given that
Only one agenda left.
14 is also closed, should we go into close on both, so that way we don't have to come back and go in?
You can call them both.
Can we do that?
call them both up, but you have to read both announcements separately.
So you'll call both 13 and 14.
All right, so agenda item 14, discuss and take appropriate action on the 1115 Medicaid waiver delivery system reform incentive payment district projects, Communicare Collaborative, including healthcare delivery arrangements, and other community partnerships.
And then read the closed session language under.
All right, is it the same code?
No, you have to read each one.
All right, I announce the board is convening in closed session to discuss agenda item 013 under section 551.072, the Texas Government Code, deliberation regarding real property. And then I announce the board is convening in closed session to discuss agenda item 14 under Texas Government Code, section 551.085, governing bodies of certain health providers of healthcare services. In addition to our architect, Travis County Council, Mr. Gizon, Monica Crowley, John Morgan, Mr. Lamp, Ms. Cavazos, Ms. McDonald, Ms. Owens, and Mr. Canola. All right, so it's December 18, 2019. It is 9:50. We're coming out of closed session with agenda item 13 and 14. No action is necessary. It's an information item only. Agenda item 16, confirm the next regular board meeting date, time, and location. The next regularly scheduled Central Health Board of Managers meeting will be held on Wednesday, January 29th, 2020, at 5:30 p.m. at the Central Health Administrative Office, 1111 East Cesar Chavez Street, Austin, Texas, 78702. And at this time, I've already accepted a motion for adjournment.
Move adjournment.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Don't forget your flowers.
The what?
Flowers.
Don't forget your poinsettia.
I will donate mine to somebody else.